Hello and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Authorities investigate a motive as details continue to emerge about the suspected shooter in the second apparent assassination attempt against Donald Trump. World leaders and even Trump's political opponents join forces to condemn the attempted attack and continued political violence. And evacuations as residents of Poland and the Czech Republic prepare for another night of heavy rain amid catastrophic floods across Central Europe. Well, we do start in the US, where authorities are working to identify a motive behind a second apparent assassination attempt made against Republican contender Donald Trump on Sunday. The suspect has been identified by American media as a 58-year-old man with a long arrest record who's an active supporter of Ukraine. Secret Service agents who came in for criticism over security failures in a previous attempt against Trump this time engaged the alleged shooter and recovered an AK-47 style rifle. World leaders are condemning the attack, and Trump's Democratic opponent, Kamala Harris, saying she's disturbed by the events and thankful former President Trump is safe. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by our correspondent there, Caroline Malone. Caroline, good to see you. Talk to us about the latest, because there have been some developments in just the last few hours.
They certainly have. The suspect actually has appeared in court in Florida, in a federal court. He has been charged with multiple gun possession charges, including possession of a gun with an obscured serial number, suggesting that he didn't get that legally. And actually, the detail has come out that he is a convicted felon of having illegal possession of a gun in the past, so this is not his first time brushing with the law. He will now appear in court in another 2 weeks' time, where he will be arraigned and he will have a chance to make his plea, whether it's guilty or not guilty, to these gun possession charges. Now, this is, of course, after the incident on Sunday in which Secret Service managed to find this person who was sticking a gun into the golf course a few holes ahead of where Donald Trump was playing golf. They were doing a sweep to try and protect the area, fortunately spotted him, opened fire. He escaped, but due to a witness who managed to identify the suspect and also take down his license plate of his car, they and the sheriff of the neighbouring county were able to find him, stop him and arrest him. So fortunately, in this situation, this suspect was found. He's already appeared in court and he is due to be arraigned in 2 weeks' time.
Now, whenever there is this type of event, and seemingly more regularly now, worryingly, but there is always an attempt to try and learn more about the shooter, about the alleged shooter, about what his motives could have been, his background, his history. This person in particular had a lot of online presence. So what has been learned?
He absolutely did have a lot of online presence, and so a lot that can be read into him at this point, though of course I'm sure throughout the court case we'll hear more. So, you know, he's tweeted in the past, he's been on social media, he's talked about having voted for Trump in 2016, he's talking about having been disappointed in Trump and also then supporting the Democrats, talking about the importance of supporting democracy and concerns over Trump potentially getting back into the White House again. But above and beyond that, he's actually tweeted a lot and been an active supporter of Ukraine. He's actually been in US media interviews in the past, and there are videos that are now quite easy to access online, showing him talking about what he sees as the importance of supporting Ukraine. It's even thought that he went to Ukraine to try and help Ukrainian soldiers in their fight against Russia. He wasn't given a place to fight, though, because he was deemed to be too old and didn't have any military experience. So, you know, seems like this person is somewhat misguided in going to Ukraine to begin with. His family members have also been interviewed, including his son, who's believed to live in Hawaii. He spoke briefly just at the beginning before really knowing any details, saying that he was a loving father and he was very surprised to hear about what had allegedly happened. But yes, this is a person that has spoken quite openly on social media about his views, about his political views, but perhaps more importantly, this is a person that appears to have illegal possession of a gun and is also a convicted felon. So this is a potential criminal that should have been known or could have been known potentially to the forces before the incident.
I mean, another angle that the news is certainly taking today, and online speculation, and obviously we don't dabble in that, but is about the level of Trump's security. And there is a real discussion to be had about this, because this is the second, it appears, attempted assassination attempt on the man running for the White House. And the first time around, there were certainly concerns his security weren't strong enough. What's being spoken about now there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one attempted assassination is shocking enough, but to have two in just over 2 months really is shocking at another level. We know from the first incident, that was back in Butler, Pennsylvania in July, the person who tried to shoot Trump obviously missed. He narrowly got his ear, but he did kill someone in the crowd. And a lot of the speculation, a lot of the scrutiny at the time was on why the Secret Service hadn't secured the perimeter. They hadn't secured the rooftop where this suspect, now deceased because he was taken out by a security agent after the incident, but why he was able to get on that rooftop, why that area wasn't protected when there was an open rally, a public rally happening. And of course, you know, they knew that Trump would be speaking. And for this second incident to happen so soon after really does even more raise questions about whether Trump has an adequate level of protection for these types of events. And even when he's, you know, playing in a sort of somewhat private setting, playing golf in his private life on a Sunday, he's, you know, potentially being targeted here. President Biden actually spoke briefly on it just this morning when he came out of the White House. He came over to the media and he said that he thinks the Secret Service need more resources. Some suggestion that he wanted Congress to do more to provide, whether it's funding or personnel, he didn't specify. But potentially there could be, you know, moves now to get more funding and personnel for the Secret Service. We've also heard members of Congress, Mike Johnson, who is the Republican House Speaker. He was talking as well about the need to have higher levels of protection for Trump. One important distinction is, because Trump is a former president, not a current president, and also a candidate, he has a certain level that's deemed to be adequate at this point. But if he had been a president, if it was President Biden, for instance, on a golf course, the entire golf course would have been covered by Secret Service. So it would have been a very clear, different level, higher level of protection. And after this second attempt in 2 months, you know, we can only imagine that very quickly Secret Service will be upping their protection for Trump and potentially Harris as well.
And yeah, I mean, you mentioned Harris and Biden there. They both obviously released statements of support for Donald Trump in the last sort of 24 hours, condemning the violence, condemning the attempted attack. But Donald Trump's actually come back in just the recent few hours on Fox News, it seems, actually blaming Democrat rhetoric for what happened to him.
Yeah, I mean, the rhetoric has evolved definitely over the last 2 months. Shortly after the first attempted assassination on Trump, Trump appeared at the Republican National Convention in those videos with his ear that was covered with a bandage. And he spoke about national unity. He spoke about decreasing political violence, how there's no place for it. And we've had just on Monday, both Biden and Harris in statements condemning any kind of political violence, talking about how they're very glad that Trump is okay and saying there's absolutely no room for political violence. But we've seen this rhetoric over the last 2 months evolve somewhat from the Trump side, in which he is now, and others in the Republican Party, blaming Harris, blaming the Democrats for what they deem to be language that is potentially encouraging this type of situation. I will say that there are similarities between the two situations, and that is they're both men, they're both white men. One was a younger man, this man is in his 50s. Both have got possession of a gun illegally or through a family member. In the case of the last suspect, who was just a young man, got it through his family member. So they are certainly able to get access to firearms in a country where there is, you know, a prolific use of firearms. And it does happen a lot more. And there is a lot of gun crime here. You combine that with someone that's potentially mentally unstable. And I'm sure there'll be a lot more talk of this in the next few weeks and months. Then you have this type of potential situation. I think as well, the conversation may move towards what can Donald Trump and Kamala Harris afford to do in these very tense times? Will their movements be somewhat restricted, potentially even more so than they have been already? We've seen, though, Donald Trump come out and he's, you know, wanting to be strong and saying he's going to carry on as normal, that this won't stop him. He won't be afraid of it. But you can only imagine that particularly the people trying to protect him will want him to be in a very safe space going forward.
Certainly, you can imagine that. Look, our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Caroline Malone, thank you. Well, still to come here on W News, residents in towns and villages across Central Europe brace for another night of heavy rains as flooding continues to devastate homes.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
To Central Europe now, where residents of towns and villages in Poland and the Czech Republic are being evacuated in anticipation of another night of heavy rain. Over the past few days, the region has been battered by storms and the worst flooding in over 2 decades. At least 14 people from Austria to Romania now reported dead as a result of the extreme weather, with that number expected to rise in coming days. Poland's government declaring a natural disaster and setting aside a $260 million relief fund. Well, to get a bit more detail from there on the ground, I'm joined now from Budapest, Hungary, by our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez. Pablo, talk to us a little bit about how it's hit Budapest and Hungary, this weather.
Well, let's begin by saying that Storm Boris has brought the heaviest rainfalls that Central and Eastern Europe has seen in decades. What we are seeing now is a slow-moving system that has caused widespread flooding, evacuations, and deaths. There's been fatalities confirmed in Poland, Romania, and Austria. And as you indicated, the Czech Republic and Poland are among the heaviest hit countries, with hundreds of homes devastated and also critical infrastructure systems severely damaged. Now, we expect this storm to roll into Hungary within the second half of this week, and authorities are already preparing for this. They expect this could be catastrophic if not all the systems are in place, and that's why they're not taking chances right now.
Talk to me about what's expected tonight then, because like you said, there's already very damaged systems, and then there's concern, certainly in places like Poland and the Czech Republic, that there's going to be more bad weather tonight. So how bad could that situation be?
Well, the situation could get worse as this storm rolls south into Hungary. We are expected to see the levels at the Danube River rise to about 8.5 meters. That is close to the record set back in 2013 when flooding wreaked havoc here in the capital city, here in Budapest. Now, authorities have been placing close attention to the flood-prone areas around Budapest. They have placed around 800,000 sandbags. Earlier today, Prime Minister Viktor Orban met with the flood preparedness team. They are making sure that all available resources are in place in case there needs to be an evacuation and in case there is severe damage, but they're hoping that will not be a fact. They're hoping that everything they're putting in place could prevent severe damages here in Hungary.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about the official response. Poland, for example, has created a relief fund for those affected by the floods. Is there a sense amongst countries in Central Europe that are affected that authorities and the governments there are doing enough to help?
Well, what we're seeing right now, for instance, here in Hungary, is that authorities are all hands on deck. We have also heard from the European Union. They are ready to assist all of the damaged countries. We don't know the extent of the damage so far because this system is continuing continuing to move. So we expect to hear more from the government and their response as the week and the days progress. But as far as Hungary, the government has said that they are ready, they're prepared, and they're asking the people to remain at home during the second half of this week just to save lives and to prevent further damages.
Just finally, Pablo, how unusual is this type of weather? Obviously, we're at the beginning of September when Europe tends to tip into that autumn weather. But weather of this extremity, how unusual is it?
Well, experts say that we should get used to extreme weather events like this. As we know, Europe is the world's fastest warming continent. And when you have a situation like this, basically they're saying the atmosphere is warming and it's holding more water vapor, and that produces heavier rains. So unfortunately, here in Europe, they're saying we should brace for events like this one. All caused, according to them, due to climate change.
Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez joined us there from Budapest in Hungary. Well, to some stories from around the world now. Elon Musk deleted a post on Monday morning that questioned why former President Donald Trump has faced 2 apparent assassination attempts in recent months, while President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have not encountered any. Elon Musk later claiming that this post was a joke. Russia has been evacuating residents from villages in the Kursk region. Kiev attacked the area in early August in a surprise turn of events since the years-long Russia-Ukraine war. Moscow has recently launched a counter-offensive, but the effort's yet to gain momentum. The governor of Kursk region saying areas within a 15-kilometre zone of the Ukraine border have been evacuated. And while Russia works on its Kursk counter-offensive, Putin orders the Russian military to hire more personnel. The president issuing a decree that will take effect on December 1st to increase Russia's troop numbers by 180,000, meaning a total of 1.5 million Russian troops in some way involved as the war in Ukraine drags on into a possible 3rd year. An earthquake of 5.47 magnitude struck Romania on Monday. Data from the German Research Centre for Geosciences showing the depth of the earthquake measuring 125 kilometres. Once high-profile BBC News presenter Hugh Edwards has been given a suspended 6-month sentence by Westminster Magistrates Court in London for being in possession of indecent images of children as young as 7 years old. The court ruling on Monday, the sentence comes with requirements, including the completion of a sex offender treatment programme and 25 rehabilitation sessions. The 63-year-old, who was arrested by the police in November, is alleged to have committed the offences between 2020 and 2022. Iran's president saying Monday Tehran will never give up on its missile program as it needs it for security, especially given its adversary Israel is able to, quote, drop missiles on Gaza every day. The Islamic Republic has for years defied Western calls to limit its missile program. The US and its allies have more recently accused Iran of transferring ballistic weapons to Russia for its war in Ukraine, imposing fresh sanctions on Moscow and Tehran. Both have denied the claims. Well, back to our top story tonight, the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump for a second time. I'm joined now from Louisiana by former Secret Service agent and current president of Python Security Consulting, Donald Lane. So thanks for making time for us. Look, US President Joe Biden saying the Secret Service needs more help and calling for more resources. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, yes. The Secret Service historically is a smaller agency, and I definitely believe, with these heightened, the heightened security around a lot of the protectees, particularly the former President Donald Trump, I do believe that an influx of personnel would help tremendously.
In that first assassination attempt a few weeks ago, there were a lot of criticisms about the way the security service around Trump behaved at the time, whether they missed things. Some said it was unfair speculation, but, one of the directors resigned over that. How does this compare to that in terms of the way the security service responded?
Well, in the first incident in July in, Butler, Pennsylvania, that was a total debacle. The Secret Service definitely dropped the ball. They should have been much better prepared. And so I don't think there's really much comparison between the two. For the one that happened here most recently, while they could have had more personnel there, the ones that were there, the agents that were there, did exactly what they should have done. They confronted this individual, prior to the former president being around that immediate area anyway. And, they were able to eventually apprehend him. So I look at, the one that happened here most recently as a success, although I'm hoping that the Secret Service will put more personnel on the detail to kind of widen the ring of protection around the former president, which I think is desperately needed.
Has the threat landscape in these kinds of attacks evolved in any way in recent years with regards to things like social media or the accessibility towards high-profile figures?
Yes, I do believe that's the case, with the kind of continuing explosion of social media, and also given a lot of divisiveness. There's a lot of divisiveness surrounding former President Donald Trump and him as a person and his family. And I think that, lends to a lot of the vitriol that you see coming out of folks' mouths around this campaign. And, I really believe that folks here in the United States need to tamp down that violent rhetoric, that causes folks who maybe aren't so stable to go out and try to do heinous, violent acts.
In terms of political and violent instability being the norm in the US, that's what some are suggesting now. That's the kind of the new normal. Would you agree with that?
I hope it's not. I certainly hope it's not the new normal. It's certainly been the case for the last few years. There's no doubt about that. What I'm hoping is that folks realize that there are ways to, if I disagree with someone politically, there's a way for me to legally and in a good faith way debate that person or have a disagreement with him or her and not resort to name calling or violence. And I'm hoping that folks realize, we need to reel things back to an environment that's safer as we move forward, and where folks can have a political discord without, name calling and threats and so forth.
Really interesting. Thank you. I mean, let's just talk for a moment about your level of expertise. You're a security consultant now, presumably advising high-profile figures about exactly this type of thing. How complicated is it to prepare and prevent this type of thing happening?
Well, if you have a system in place, it's not that it's necessarily complicated. It's certainly very involved oftentimes. There are a lot of different things to take into consideration, starting with the advance, securing the places where this protectee will be traveling or going to. And, so it's a very involved procedure. It requires a lot of personnel and a lot of expertise. I wouldn't say it's necessarily difficult, although it's taxing, certainly, with respect to time and with respect to a lot of things that need to get done normally in a very short period of time.
In terms of copycats, are you concerned about that in terms of seeing more frequency of this type of thing?
Always concerned about it, yes. It's a concern of mine all the time. I think as folks, again, particularly those who maybe are unstable or who have, something to prove or have some violent ideology, there's always the fear that they're going to see someone do this and decide, it's my turn to go out there and try to do this as well. So, I think agencies like the Secret Service need to be on guard for things like that, as they would, generally do for any event.
Former Secret Service agent and current president of Python Security Consulting, Donald Lane. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, to some business news now. And could TikTok be banned in America? Today sees the latest chapter in a long-running battle between TikTok and the US Justice Department. This time, a panel of judges reviewing TikTok's legal challenge against a law passed by Congress in April. The popular app saying it's a matter of free speech and protecting an open internet. And more headline-grabbing court battles as another US case begins Monday. This time, media mogul Rupert Murdoch battling 3 of his children over who'll get control of his companies News Corp and Fox News after his death. The family's vast empire estimated to be worth some $19.5 billion. And US plane maker Boeing today announcing big spending cuts and saying it's weighing up furloughs and a hiring freeze. This in response to a major strike by factory workers who voted against a proposal by the embattled company. Talks are expected to be mediated on Tuesday. A reminder of our top stories. Authorities investigate a motive as details continue to emerge about the suspected shooter in the second apparent assassination attempt against Donald Trump. World leaders and even Trump's political opponents have joined forces to condemn the attack and continued political violence. And evacuations as residents of Poland and the Czech Republic prepare for another night of heavy rain amid catastrophic floods across Central Europe. Well, that's all we've got time for now. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble and her special interview with the former Brexit Secretary David Davis. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burges Watson for Global News Today with special guest Martin Luther King Jr. III.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversations.
David Davis, thank you so much for joining me. I want to kick off by asking you to just give us an overview in your mind of where we are in the Tory leadership race.
Oh, wow. Well, we are just a day or so short, they're too short, of the second round, which will reduce them from 5 to 4. And at this point in time, there will be all sorts of manoeuvring going on to try to get the people they think are their strongest opponents out. So that's what tends to happen. So the lending of votes from one group to another, and so on, and quite a struggle for votes. And the truth is, they're all pretty even to each other. I mean, you know, anybody who takes a bet on who goes out on Wednesday has a high appetite for risk, because it's very, very hard to predict. My hunch is that both Kevin Badenoch, and Jenrick will both still be in. The rest I couldn't guess.
Who are you backing? What horse are you backing?
I'm not. I mean, I've been talking to all of them. I did originally vote for Priti Patel before she went out, because I thought she was at risk of going out and I wanted to try and keep her in. That wouldn't necessarily have been my final vote, but it was just to sort of keep them, in my view, the main players in, and I still haven't decided. Indeed, I'm speaking to one of them tomorrow, literally, for them to try and persuade me. I have issues with all of them because, I mean, let me take one example for you. A number of them are saying, right, we want to pull out of the European Court of Human Rights, right? That's an absolute no-no for me, because I don't trust governments.
You're part of government.
I know. Well, I'm now an opponent to our government at the moment, but I don't trust governments. Governments are very untrustworthy with unfettered power. And although I think the ECHR is a nightmare of an organisation, does all sorts of things it shouldn't do, it is there at the end of the day to protect the individual. That's what the original convention.
If governments are a nightmare, in terms of power. Is that what happened to the Tory party? Because many would say they're in a death spiral.
Oh, they're not in a death spiral. We've been here before. I've been around since Gladstone, right? So I've seen a few other supposed death spirals, and that's not the case. But there's no doubt that the last Conservative government lost its way, arguably forgot what conservatism was for, and. The leaders are not entirely blameworthy in that. They are partly blameworthy, certainly. But things like the COVID crisis sort of broke the back of the normal approach to government and landed us with, what, £500 billion of deficit, which we've now somehow got to pay off in the next... I mean, so it's like a war debt. You know, so it sort of broke the back of things. So, yeah, they lost their way, but they're not in a death spiral. They'll be back.
Have we a bit of a weak bench in this leadership race?
Well, it's not Margaret Thatcher versus Ted Heath, let's put it that way. One of the difficulties is none of them's... because, I mean, bluntly, in modern politics, we have a bit of a cult of youth. I mean, the average age of this leadership bench, as you put it, is probably 10 years less than would have been the case in most previous circumstances. In Margaret Thatcher's government, most of the people standing for leader now would probably have been a minister of state at best, you know. So I don't think in innate talent, but in experience, they are a weak bench.
Yeah. Speaking from experience, when you look at what's happening right now in the world today, we're talking about Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, the fact that there's a presidential election happening in the United States that has put virtually everything else on hold. What's your greatest concern?
Well, my greatest concern is the confluence of events, right? I do not remember a time like this in the number of combined challenges to government, both internationally and nationally, since 1975. I picked 1975 because that's the year the Tory party chose Margaret Thatcher as its new leader, right? And we all at the time, I mean, I was one of her supporters, we all at the time weren't sure we got it right. Right? Why? Because then we had inflation, high on inflation, unemployment, oil shocks. We had a dominant Soviet Union, a growing China, us in decline, withdrawal from empire, failures of public services at home, couldn't balance the books, you know, foreign...
Cornucopia of challenges.
A cornucopia of challenges. And we got the same today. You know, you've got the first war in Europe since the Second World War. You've got the Middle East in some of the most complex, problematic positions, whether it's Gaza or the Yemen, having huge impacts, and impacts on world trade because of the challenges there. You've got a dominant China, an unstable Russia, and at home you've got a National Health Service, which we've been unable to deliver proper outcomes from. You've got problems in all other areas of public service, an incredible problem balancing the books. And you talk about death spirals, the spiral we've got at the moment is a possible taxes go up, growth goes down. Taxes go up more, growth goes down more. And that's a spiral that I fear, not a political death spiral, an economic spiral.
Yeah. If Margaret Thatcher was with us today, what do you think she'd think of her party?
She'd be telling them off and telling them to buck up, I say. Buck your ideas up, boys.
When you think about, as you say, the financial issues that are facing this government, essentially, they're a government seeking tremendous reform. How difficult do you think that is going to be for the Tories going forward? Because essentially, Keir Starmer is standing for a heck of a lot that you guys don't.
Well, he's talking a big story on reform, but I can't actually see how the talk is addressing the big subjects. Take the health service. Lots and lots of stories about reform, but what are they going to do? I mean, you know, they've already paid off a vast sum of money to the junior doctors. They appeared not to have got any productivity outcome from that at all, you know. And this is true actually across the board. Every single wage settlement they've made, and they are beginning to be quite inflationary, every single wage settlement they've made has come without any productivity deal. In truth, not a real one anyway. So I'm not sure that that they're really talking that. Also, in economic terms, they still think Gordon Brown was a good chancellor. And so what they're trying to do is copy Gordon Brown, right down to we've just read the books. The books are always open. You know, in every Western democracy, you can read the books, whoever you are. That was a Gordon Brown trick. If you look in detail at what Rachel Reeves has done in terms of her planning, she made a thing called the Mays Lecture, which is a very big, high prestige lecture the Chancellor makes. And in her Mays Lecture, she basically said, we're going to do the off-balance sheet financing that Gordon Brown did, things like PFIs. I'm not sure whether your audience would know that, private finance initiatives, right? Mm-hmm. To give you a measure of how that worked, in Gordon Brown's day, to get 50 billion of assets, we ended up paying the private sector 275 billion. Bankers made a lot of money out of it, but we didn't get much out of it. So I don't see a big reforming government. What I see is a big talking government, and one that makes quite a few mistakes already, you know.
Yeah. Speaking of the bankers, speaking of finance, I mean, so many folks that I have spoken to have said they are considering leaving the United Kingdom. There are worries about capital flight. What is the risk, in your mind, to the economy?
Well, that's a really serious risk. I mean, you've got already, I mean, and it's partly the old government's fault. This bit is partly the old, well, actually a whole series of governments, right back to Blair and including Blair. We have got an over-regulated city now, if we talk banking and finance, you know, and as a result, already we've lost some trade. The LIBOR trade, the interbank borrowing trade has gone to New York, for example. But there's lots of others too. And loads of people are talking about leaving now. I mean, given that in some of these businesses, whether it's banking or tech, or even not the electronic tech, but even the sort of pharmaceutical areas and things like that, you can work from anywhere in the world now.
And they've just seemingly made it much harder to do work in this country.
They made it hard to do work. We have
and somehow shameful to make money.
I don't think they're quite there. I mean, back during the Blair days, and by the way, never underestimate the extent to which not so much Blair himself, but the Blair camp has influence with this government. Huge influence. You know,
we heard him speaking just a few days ago and blaming the migration crisis on the Tories.
Yeah, as usual. But he
does have a point, does he not? The migration crisis being, at least partially the fault of the former government.
The migration crisis, we tend to be rather blinkered about this. If you look around Europe, every single country in Europe, there's not one that doesn't have a migration crisis. And most of them are bigger than ours, right? Ours is rather visible because of the boats crossing the channel, the illegal migration issue. But
so you're saying we've got one, but it just ain't that big by comparison?
No. I'm saying it's big, but I'm saying no government in Europe has managed to get a grip of it. Not one. Doesn't matter whether they're left, right, centre, new, old, none of them got a grip of it. Now, I was not a particular fan of the Rwanda policy, you know, but at the end of the day, I thought, well, we haven't got anything else to deter these people. And I think one of the great mistakes Rishi Sunak made by going so early was he didn't give the Rwanda policy a chance to happen. Because and this is an oblique answer to your question, had they actually carried out the Rwanda policy and got some flights out there, the next thing would have happened is the rest of Europe would have copied us, right, left and centre. As it is, now we've abandoned it, Germany's taken it over. But if we'd actually carried it on with it, the Germans, the French, the Austrians already, even the European Union would be talking about third country policies. That's what it is. It's anybody comes here who doesn't have a right to be here, they get sent to a third country they didn't want to go to, you know. What we didn't do was finish that job. We didn't finish the delivery of the Rwanda job. So that was the primary public failure. The other one was a decision to allow basically 1 million people to come here legally. And I think that was driven by the Treasury. And it would be very interesting, because again, it goes back to Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown and Blair discovered, if we want to keep talking about having a terrific growth record, if we bring millions of people to the country, that pushes the growth up by itself. It's an artificial way of doing it, but nobody sees it, and it makes us look good. And I think we're going to see the same again here, actually. Otherwise, their growth numbers are going to be terrible. So let's see. I'll come back in a year, and we'll talk about how this government's done with this. But I suspect it's going to prove harder than they think.
How have you seen Keir Starmer's recent travels? Because he seems to have been scurrying to every European capital, trying to make new friends and get some agreements.
Well, I don't blame him for that. Look, if you're a new government and you've come in after whatever it is, 18 years of your previous, or 14 years of your previous government, you want to make the most of it. You're a new kid on the block. A lot of other countries will be willing to big you up. It's an easy photo opportunity. And there undoubtedly will have been countries sitting back and waiting, not doing deals on this, that and the other with the outgoing government, precisely because it was seen as an outgoing government. Yeah. Why would you do that? You'd wait until the new one comes in. And so he'll go and make the most of it. Frankly, I can't blame him for that. Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of things I can blame him for, but not that.
Undermining Brexit in some way.
No, not immediately. I mean, let me differentiate. I think there's a perfectly good argument for trying to warm up the relationship with some of our European colleagues. They have all got big problems of their own. Germany's economic problems and their immigration problems are off the scale. France has got It's got a divided nation, basically, in terms of its parliament. So they've all got things that they want to resolve. Now, trying to warm up relations, that's fine. That's good diplomacy. But I think in some senses Starmer may be naive if he thinks he's going to get something for nothing. Because what you can guarantee is they're going to have a shopping list. And the shopping list will be fishing rights in the North Sea, or it'll be the rights of young Europeans, by which we mean up to 30-year-olds, we're not talking adolescents here, right to come here for 4 years and so on. So you may get some backdoor things which do undermine Brexit. But so that comes out of naivety, really, on their part. I don't think it's his intention, but I think he may end up doing some of that by accident.
You mentioned Tony Blair. What's the danger in the senior doyen of the Labour Party having influence today?
Well, the part of the danger is what I've already mentioned, which is that the economic strategy of the Blair government was one that relied hugely on luck. You know, they were given a very, very good economy when they took over. They themselves said that, not publicly particularly, but privately. And then it ran out with the 2008 crash. And then everything fell to bits, and the poor financial structure of the government suddenly became apparent. If the current Labour government continues to believe that Blair and Brown were good at economics, they'll make the same mistakes: off-balance sheet accounting, poor control of costs, and poor management of growth, because they don't have such a lucky backdrop. The world at large is more problematic. America's going, well, it's interesting. We don't know where America's going to go, but it's already got probably the biggest piece of protectionist legislation in modern times in the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, and you're seeing things like that all around the world. Europe is doing things like putting carbon tariffs on everybody, not just on us, on everybody. All these disruptive impacts on world trade is going to come right back into our own account, and it's going to hit our growth rates. So it's going to be harder for them. So if they just swallow, well, what happened last time, it won't work.
Yeah. Who is better for the United Kingdom, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
If I were an American, I'd probably vote for Harris. almost for stability reasons, right? Not because I think one policy or the other's better.
Well, but the Biden administration hasn't really delivered on stability.
You know, I mean, I'm thinking economic stability, but
some would argue not even that.
Yeah, not even that. I know, but in comparative terms, Trump is very unpredictable. Now, there are some virtues in that. I mean, there's some virtues in having an unpredictable leader because it means people won't take chances. I mean, I always say...
I mean, do you honestly think Vladimir Putin would have invaded Ukraine had Donald Trump been in office?
Well, that's the question, you see. And I think there is a virtue in that. You see, I mean, I think... Take one of America's most... best regarded presidents of modern times, Obama, right? Obama was a calculator. You know, that's the nature of the man. He was an intellectual, sort of a lawyer, of course, but, you know, he calculated out everything. And the trouble with being a calculator is the other side can calculate too, you know. And so, you know, he makes his chess move and Putin makes his chess move, and he knows how far he can go. With someone like Trump, he's liable just to tip the chessboard up, you know, and you saw a little bit of that in his reaction to some of the Middle Eastern issues with missile attacks and so on. But you know, that's a lot to gamble on.
Yeah.
There's a lot to gamble on. So, you know, it wouldn't be an easy choice for me, but that's the way I go. You asked in terms of Britain. For us, the most important element of the relationship is NATO. You know, by a country mile, you know, whatever happens on economics will be marginal. What happens on defence will be enormous. And NATO has never been more important and never actually been weaker. You know, those two things together are terrifying. Now, it's turning around, but it's taking forever. You know, people...
Some would argue, though, that President Trump, while in office, actually galvanized a re-strengthening of that alliance, simply because he said, you guys have got to get off your rear end.
Funnily enough, I had this conversation with Nigel Farage, who's obviously close to Trump, and I said to him, I said, when you talk to him, tell him, you know, a lot of us agree with him, you know, kicking 7 bells out of the Germans and others for not spending enough on defence. I said, but if that's read as abandoning NATO or threatening to abandon NATO, that has the opposite impact.
Yeah.
It has, you know, it will say to Putin, actually, I don't care that much about this lot, this bunch of, you know, sort of, what's the right word? There were people free riders, you know.
Yeah.
And that's the dangerous line. And I've not heard anything for him saying, you know, NATO is massively important. Every other president since the formation of NATO, just after the Second World War, has been very clear. And, you know, it's the old thing. If you want peace, prepare for war. Yeah. And what we have done is spent the peace dividend. Even the phrase "the peace dividend," it's actually like cutting back on the house insurance because you don't think it's going to burn down. You know, terrible. So that's the worry. You know. So as you can tell by my agonised answer here, you know, it's quite a difficult call.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know, if suddenly Trump turned around and said, actually, you know, whatever I do, I will stand up for our allies. That might be it. That might alter my view, but at the moment, you know,
wouldn't hold your breath.
It's not there.
Yeah.
You know.
Talk to me a little bit about more broadly Europe, because obviously the NATO conversation has started other conversations about European collective defense. You know, who is the leader of Europe? We used to talk about Germany with their economic issues and lack of leadership. We're now talking about France. Michel Barnier as the new Prime Minister of France. Yeah. Good for Europe, good for UK relations?
Well, good for France, I think. Let me just deal with a slightly wider question for 30 seconds. Europe is in a bigger mess than I can remember in my adult life. Economically, it's all over the shop. I mean, people whinge on about the consequence of Brexit. We're lucky not to be in there at the moment, to be honest, because all of them are doing badly. Pretty much all of them are doing badly. And partly it's over-regulation, partly it's just
the energy question,
energy and circumstance, as well, and of course their dependence on Russia, you name it. So all of those things are problematic, and they don't have answers. And the second order consequence of that is massive division. You've got Germany. We designed the German constitution to prevent the rise of far right-wing parties.
And they're back.
It was literally the Brits and the French, to some extent, sat down and constructed that constitution for that reason. And it's failed. And it's partly because of all the other challenges. So it's a really, really grim, difficult backdrop. Now, Michel, dear old Michel, I actually think Michel's going to be good for France. He was, at one point he wanted to run for president, decided he couldn't get the support. But nevertheless, I think he's good for France for a variety of reasons. Firstly, I think the current, the new French Prime Minister, Michel as it is, biggest job is going to be managing the division in their own parliament. It's really tough, And Michel's got a sufficiently strong political base that he can reach out beyond. Basically, he's a Gaullist, right?
Yes.
He can reach out. Literally a Gaullist. He's an admirer of President de Gaulle, and he can reach out across the divide in a way I think Macron can't. Partly because Macron is the ultimate énarque, the ultimate product of the École Nationale, like so much of, like so much of the French establishment.
And that generation.
Yeah, political, diplomatic, civil service, and corporate, the lot. They're all énarques, right? And part of this split across Europe, and indeed the vote in the last election here, is a reaction to the sort of the elite not solving the problems that the ordinary people care about. That's why immigration is such a powerful argument. Now, that's not what Michel. That's not where he came from. I don't know if you know about his background. He started out as the mayor of Val d'Isère during the great French ski Olympics, Winter Olympics. He's one of Jean-Claude Killy's best friends. Again, for your audience, probably a lot younger than me, one of the great downhill skiers of all time. There are fantastic pictures of him flying, apparently completely out of control, winning the gold medals. And so he came up the local government route. And he's not an école. He's not the sort of elitist. He
wasn't a corporate lawyer.
Not a corporate lawyer. He's not the elitist, and he's been in public service for a very long time. I first met him when I was Europe minister back in 1994. That's how far back this goes. And he wasn't a genius, but he was good, capable.
That's your friend you're talking about.
Yeah. But he is. But he's good, capable, reliable. You knew where he came from. He wouldn't always be on your side either, but very often with me. But a sort of man, you think in a fight, I want him on my side.
Yeah, so not a genius, but good for France.
Yeah. You don't have to be. Listen, you don't have to be a genius to be a senior politician. Look around the world, And the other thing to bear in mind as well, and I think people don't see this sometimes, is that in France the Prime Minister is very much second string. I saw this really dramatically once, and I went to a conference in France in Tours, I think it was, and Mitterrand was the president, and we were talking to the then Prime Minister. And Mitterrand turns up, and it's like the king has arrived, red carpet, brass band, military, everything, and the whole place was locked down as well. And then we had a press conference, and he chaired the press conference and told the Prime Minister what, when he could talk, basically. So the relationship is quite a dominant one. Well, not quite, a very dominant one between the President and the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister's got to do the practical stuff. And I think Michel will be very good at that indeed.
Yeah. Walk me through the current situation surrounding Lucy Letby. For you, this is a case that smells.
Yeah. when the Letby case first happened, like most of the country, I thought, well, if she did that, she deserved to go to prison and they throw away the key, you know. And that's what I thought up until about 3.5 months ago. And I was sitting in my room waiting for a telephone call from a guy called Mike Lynch, who had just been fighting a case in California and just won it. And so I was waiting for an American telephone call, and up comes an American number, and I pick up my phone, and it's not him, it's somebody in New York, one of the previous Prime Minister's science advisors. And he said, have you seen The New Yorker? Well, I have to say, The New Yorker's not my normal reading, not sitting in London. And I said, no. And he said, well, there's a 13,000-word article about the Letby trial. I try and get hold of it. Can't get it. It's blocked online by court order. Yeah. I managed to get a copy. I read it. It's really quite persuasive. There are a lot of problems in this, right? So I raised in Parliament the next day, why can't we get a copy of this so we can actually, everybody read it? We believe in open justice, don't we? And after that, I got calls from past presidents of the Royal Statistical Society, past presidents of the Royal Paediatric and...
people were coming out of the woodwork. Yeah,
but not just... I mean, you often, in my position, you often get a whole load of conspiracy theorists come out. If I got up and, I don't know, talked about vaccines or something, I'd get thousands of people email me. This wasn't that. These were people who were at the top of the profession, the relevant professions, neonatologists, statisticians, medical forensic scientists, criminal forensic scientists, and people who had worked at that hospital before. So this great influx. And what it makes me worry, I mean, basically it makes me worried that the fundamental bits of the case, I haven't been able to read every single word of the case because I can't get the transcript's not available, but I've read vast amounts of reporting, literally files and files and files about it, and I'm worried, and I think they need to have a proper appeal, basically, a proper full appeal and retrial, really. I don't know that Lucy Letby's innocent, but I don't believe she's been proven guilty. That's where I'm at on this, and it's incredibly controversial and sensitive. I mean, you can imagine how the parents of the dead children feel. They're really, really upset by people even suggesting this lady might be innocent. But if she is innocent, then you've got to wonder what the other causes are. What do we know? Well, there's very, very little firm evidence. There's loads and loads of circumstantial evidence, but no firm evidence. But the one firm thing we know is the number of children who died in this hospital jumped from 2 or 3 to 15 to 17. That sort of number. There are different depending on the dates. Which was an astonishing increase. Now, was that a statistical artifact? Some professors of stats have said, yes, it probably is. Was it the murder, which is what the outcome of the trial was? Was it the failure of the whole medical system, the doctors, not enough trained nurses, not enough trained doctors, not enough resources? Because
given the state of the health system in this country, that could all be in fact true.
And in fact, there's a report saying exactly that about this hospital. That came out before the trial, but wasn't shown to the trial. One of the things I worry about, they didn't see this. There's a report from a doctor who looked at all the deaths and said there were natural causes.
Who's at fault there? Is it her lawyer's not good enough? And what was?
I can't tell. But what I do know is that from my point of view, if the trial had been done with those included, I'd be less worried about it. And then finally, it might be something else. It might be an external cause like a superbug. We know there's a drug called Pseudomonas in the water there. That can kill. We're talking, just for your audience, these are neonates. They're sort of 30 weeks, 25 weeks gestation in some cases. They're this big. They're sort of a couple of pounds. 800 grams is the sort of lowest weight that they...
Very vulnerable.
Very, very, very... And they don't really, at that period in their development, they don't really have an immune system, because otherwise you'd kill the mother, because they're normally still in gestation. So you got that. So you got that Pseudomonas, and you probably got others because they've got terrible plumbing problems. Again, old hospital, leaky plumbing, sewage backing up. Now, it just seems to me that these children may have died because of failures of the system, You know, and if that's the case, then the Lucy Letby trial is not just a miscarriage, which it would be in those circumstances, but we've got real problems with the health service which are being hidden behind the trial, and that's a real problem, because it isn't just this hospital. If you look around the country in neonatal units, you see spikes everywhere. You know, from time to time. We've got a rash of serial murders, or have we got a more systematic failing in our health service?
Do you believe this government should raise an inquiry here in a very serious way? Because, as you say, it extends beyond just this woman.
No, I don't think so. Not in that sense. I think the proper answer to this is a thing in Britain called the CCRC, the Criminal Case Review Commission, right? I don't believe, even when I think something's gone wrong, I don't believe government should meddle in the law. I've seen it being done before, and it's not a nice thing to see. And governments, America, Britain, all the countries that are like us, rely on the rule of law. And the rule of law can't be the rule of law subject to the government meddling. All right, that's so no is the answer. What I think should happen is it should go back to the CCRC, and they should look at it properly and ideally decide on a new appeal, proper appeal, in which case we can test all these things. Now there's a Thirlwell inquiry going on. There's an inquiry starting tomorrow on what we can learn from it, and what I hope the Thirlwell inquiry will do is not just say, oh, right, she's guilty, so how can we detect murderers in future? But say, this is a more general problem. Because remember, she's charged with 7 murders, but 15 or more children died. So what about the other 8, Yeah. And this is, in a way, it's bigger than a miscarriage, because the ideal outcome of a report like this is to prevent it happening again, And, we're talking probably hundreds of babies' lives, really, really, really important.
Yeah. You mentioned conspiracy theories. I have to ask you about the death of Mike Lynch and also, just days earlier, the death of his business partner. Foul play at work?
I don't think so. I'll wait and see what the inquiries say, right? But I don't think so. You're quite right. It is the most extraordinary odds. It's millions to one, probably many, many millions to one against two co-defendants, both of whom succeed in the same trial in a big, big corporate battle for hundreds, well, actually billions of dollars or pounds at stake. For them to die within 2 days is very, very, very long odds. If it were, I tell you what, if the opponent was a Russian corporation, I'd be taking personal measures.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think so. But I will read the Italian. The Italians will do a good job. This is one area where the continental approach of inquisitorial justice rather than adversarial justice,
Yes.
We're both used to adversarial justice in Britain and America. I think inquisitorial approach to what happened, who did what when, what doors were left open and so on, will be much more effective at getting the truth. And when that comes out, I'll read it carefully and review the answer to your question. But at the moment, no, I'm not assuming it's anything other than an incredibly long shot. After all, long shots happen all the time. I sometimes say to people, winning the lottery is a long shot, but somebody always does, So this is the case. This is very personal to me. I had lunch with Mike after he'd won the case in America. He came and he rang me up. It's the early part of the election, and he said, "Shall we have a boozy lunch?" So we went at a celebratory lunch at Wilton's in London, and we had a long, very, very good lunch, very nice lunch, and we talked about Letby. Actually, we talked about. I said, "So what are you going to do next?" And he said, well, I want to be able to answer what he calls the St. Peter question. What do you mean by that? He said, well, when I knock on the pearly gates, I and St. Peter says, what have you done with your life? I want to be able to give a good answer, you know. So I'm going to first work to get this treaty with the Americans, this extradition treaty, which had led to him being tried in California, and basically incarcerated in California for a year and then tried. I'm going to get that fixed. Then I'm going to set up an innocence project. There is one in the States, I think, which is designed to help people for which there have been miscarriages of justice. He said, I think I'm going to start with this Lucy Letby trial. Now, he'd been in California and I'd been here, so he didn't know I was taking an interest.
Yes.
So just from his own instincts, because he was a fabulous statistician, you know, he made himself pretty much a billionaire on being the best statistical analyst in the world and being able to turn that into software. He said, I think I want to do that. And then he said, but meanwhile, I'm going to go and have a holiday. And laughingly, he said, yeah, you don't fancy a trip to the Mediterranean, you? And I said, no, I've got an election to fight. But I think to myself sometimes, what if I'd taken the invite, you know? But it wasn't really an invite, it just threw out the line. But so quite something. But no, I don't. I think there are lots of things to say about Mike Lynch's final few years, but I don't think murder enters into it. I don't think so.
There's just been a report out that HP is looking to recoup their legal fees. In your mind, is this something that should be allowed to happen? No.
I mean, firstly, I think they, not just their legal fees, they want to basically take his whole fortune
from his widow.
From his widow. I mean, firstly, in the sort of lexicon of tastelessness, you know, while his widow's still recovering in hospital in Italy, to come out with that, I think, really says something about Hewlett-Packard. I've got very, very little time for the Hewlett-Packard management. Secondly, I think they're wrong, and I thought that they won a civil case in Britain on this, right? But I thought the judge made the wrong call. You know, I mean, I read it very, very carefully. I've studied at London Business School and Harvard Business School. I can read a balance sheet, and my view on it was the judge here got it wrong. The jury, ironically, in California on 15 counts, unanimously found in favour of Mike and against Hewlett-Packard, in effect, both him and his colleague. And I think we need to come back and appeal the British case and play out the same argument that we played in California. And I think the appeal court will find against Hewlett-Packard. And I hope they'll award spectacular costs against them, just as a lesson in manners, frankly.
In your mind, if evidence does stand up that there were major faults on the part of the captain, on the part of the crew, would you support a criminal prosecution?
Yes, I would if it's culpable, which sounds like a sidestep. Look, one of the stark outcomes here was that most of the crew, nearly all the crew survived, nearly all the passengers died. Right? Now, the first responsibility of a captain or the watch, the
is to explain where the exits are. Is
to look after the safety of everybody on board, and in particular those who probably know least, who will be the guests. Now, if what is shown is culpable negligence, then or culpable action, leaving hatches open, not making sure that people knew early enough that there was a risk. Then yes, criminal charges will be appropriate, and I would expect the Italians would bring them, and that is why I think that they're quizzing everybody under sort of a criminal remit, really, at the moment. So that's the right thing to do, but it's culpable. A single accident doesn't do it. It's culpable negligence or culpable action that's the issue here. But there we are.
David, final question. What are the perks of being in the opposition? Are there any?
No.
None whatsoever?
No.
You have more time to focus on your areas of particular interest?
Look, I mean, I'm an unusual MP and I've been in opposition before. I quite enjoy opposition. I would never seek to be in opposition because, what we're trying to do is run the country, so we want to be in government. But opposition's a different set of challenges. and it's a lot of quite high-profile conflicts and arguments, and you are very much more on your own wits in opposition. So in government, you know, you're fed your speeches, they tell you when you're going to appear in the Commons, they do all the rules checking for you. You know, you've got basically legions of people working for you. Legions of clever people for the most part. In opposition, when I was in opposition last time, I removed 3 government ministers in short order, one after another. 2 Home Secretaries and 1 Minister of State. That took probably about as much work as I put into earning my first degree, you know, in terms of, and my own work, you know, all the research, all the study, all the analysis. And on the days before we actually got rid of 2 of those ministers, I and my team were up all night working it through, you know. When we were challenging the government over the death of Jean-Charles de Menezes, somebody got shot after our 7/7 crisis, wrongly. They've got the wrong person murdered, the state murdered an innocent person. We had to do the work on that, you know. And it was vast amounts of work. But that being said, it is formidably satisfying. If you can hold a government to account, if you can make them change their behaviour and make sure that in the future they don't shoot innocent people, or change their behaviour so that, for example, I mean, the first time Tony Blair was defeated in government was by me on a thing called 90 days detention without charge. The idea the state can lock people up for 3 months without even telling them why they're locked up. And I beat him on that. You know, that's an important piece of British history which was done from opposition. So I enjoy myself. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but most of my colleagues who don't even know that's coming, you know.
Is there a danger in your mind that the Labour government, as is now, could knock the Britishness out of being Britain? And I ask that because, very much like in the United States, there are 2 parties, schools of thought that are fundamentally opposed at this point. And when I speak to those who have been, like yourself, in the previous governments for a long time now, there are fundamental worries about a change to British society. And we see that in the riots that we saw recently. There's a lot of conflict there. Is it a class warfare issue? In your mind, how dangerous is this government, potentially?
I don't think governments can, in the short term, alter the character of nations. They can change the institutions, which in turn do that. But I think the riots you're talking about and the reactions you're talking about, they're a little bit like the Brexit referendum. They are people reacting to a class that they feel has ignored their interests or is contemptuous of them or whatever. Now that, you know, the rioters were wrong. Let's be plain about that. There's no 2 ways about it. They were breaking the law. They deserve to be punished. But that sort of reaction comes out of that sort of problem. So I don't think they'll change the character of Britain. What I have to watch, and one of my jobs really, is that they don't change the institutions. I mean, Britain, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, all have histories built on an institutional structure which nobody designed. It sort of came together, you know, and broadly speaking, it's why we have been successful as nations. I think why most of what we do is admirable, you know, not everything, but most of what we do is admirable. And that's down to the institutional structure. It's not to virtuous politicians, one way or another. It's because the rule of law, the action of democracy, free speech, all are fundamental to what makes us what we are, much more than our DNA or whatever. And that's what we have to protect. And if we protect that, then the character of the nation will go where it wants to go, and it'll generally pick a good place to be. That's it.
So it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
In a journey that is rich in its content and substantiated by its details, from primitive cave drawings to the engraving of letters on stones, it set out. Writing was invented, and the alphabet shortly followed. And is the case in all journeys. What is new is the title. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you. As you enter a meditative state, as you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. The first calligraphers excelled in their precision and artwork skills. They added diacritics, and with ink and tools they wrote it all out, and they decorated them with their motifs. These are the messages of light, passed on through the history of Arab manuscripts. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you as you enter a meditative state. As you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. When you have the opportunity to handle a manuscript, you'll begin to wonder, how were these papers made? How were all these manuscripts written and duplicated? How did they last long enough to reach us in a state of fine quality, grace, and elegance? They bear the history of the Arabs, preserving their intellectual prowess in all the fields of knowledge. All of this confirms the importance of Arab manuscripts and reflects how skillful and capable ancient Arab manufacturing had become. The manuscript industry was based on four main pillars. The appearance and material the paper was made of was the first and most important pillar, especially paper that was made from papyrus plant, and parchment that was made from animal skin, and paper that was made of linen and hemp. The second of these pillars was the ink and midad that was used, and the various colors that were selected. The third pillar was the pen that was used, which included the associated tools and calligraphy methods that were used. Binding was the fourth and final pillar in the production of an Arab manuscript. Sources make varying claims regarding the kind of paper used in manufacturing manuscripts. It mostly depends on the raw material that the paper was made of. Besides parchment, papyrus was widespread, and it reigned supreme for an extended period of time until paper, or al-kaghid, was invented and was deemed a fierce competitor to them. It reached its zenith in the middle of the 5th century Hijri. It replaced papyrus, and the printing presses that began to use paper were more common and prevalent. The Arabs of the pre-Islamic era and Islam were familiar with papyrus, which was known as al-Qaratis, as an important material used for writing. It was even mentioned in their poetry. Tarafa bin al-Abd likened the face of his beloved to al-Qurtas from the Levant, as it is white and pure. Their cheek is similar to al-Qurtas from the Levant, and was encrypted like a Yemeni stone that had not been exposed. Papyrus constituted an important leap in the manuscript industry. It led to developments in the authorship and inscribing processes, and also helped spread information across vast distances because of the advantages this paper had. It was light, non-cumbersome to store and transport. The paper could even be transported through the folds of clothing. The papyrus plant would grow abundantly in the swamps of the river delta in ancient times. The ancient Egyptians benefited from it, and it resulted in the development of one of the most important industries, which are considered one of the greatest accomplishments that Egypt had offered human civilization, that being the paper-making industry. From this papyrus plant, paper is made. It is one of the most important agricultural crops that grew in the swamps of the delta in Egypt. And there are various species of it present in Sudan till this very day. They served many purposes in ancient Egypt, which ranged from making boxes, baskets, and ropes, but its core value lies within its use in making paper. Egypt was considered a center for this important industry, and it began to export a large portion of what they produced to the countries of the ancient world. The papyrus plant is from the sedge family of plants that belongs to the cypress genus and the papyrus species. The word paper is derived from papyrus, and it is what we use in the English language. The length of the papyrus plant ranges from 7 to 10 feet, and it is made of a trisection stem. Its bark is thin and coarse, and a width of a single reed is about 1.5 inches. The reed has a core made of cellular tissue, which paper is made out of. The reed is split into two, and each half is sliced from the center of the stem. The pulp slices are then placed side by side on flat wooden surfaces. A second set of these slices are placed perpendicularly to the first layer, and they are stacked side by side. These slices are then soaked and are gently pressed with pieces of wood until they level out. They are then left to dry in the sun. The end result is a piece of paper ranging in its size from 20 to 30 centimeters in width and 30 to 40 centimeters in length. It is easy to make files of varying lengths out of papyrus. Separate papers are bound together, where they are polished and pasted again until we obtain a roll that can reach 15 meters in length. Only one side of the papyrus would be used for writing. and it would be the side that had fibers that were horizontal, so that the pen that was used would be able to write with little to no resistance. The papyrus roll is then cut up into equal pieces, which are then written on and stacked on top of each other. It is used in corresponding messages, pamphlets, and manuscripts. Everything that nature made available to mankind has been used to aid them. Here we have papyrus paper. Thousands of them are preserved in libraries around the world. The Phoenicians transferred them to people around the world. We have received many letters and instruments that were written and described on papyrus, including papyrus from Hierakonpolis Magna. This papyrus dates back to 22 Hijri. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo has the oldest manuscript that is written on papyrus. This manuscript dates back to 4,500 years ago, and it contains details about the work the builders of the pyramid of the pharaoh Khufu partook in. It was found by a team of French and Egyptian archaeologists in Wadi al-Jarf on the coast of the Red Sea. Unfortunately, only fragments of the early works of Arab manuscripts that were written on papyrus have made their way to us. Among them are Mawti'a Malik bin Anas, the Journal of Humam bin Munabbih, and the Journal of Abdullah bin al-Hayya. The most complete manuscript that has reached us that was written on papyrus is the book titled A Collection of Prophetic Hadiths by Abdullah bin Wahb, who passed away in the year 97 Hijri in the region of Idfu in Upper Egypt, and it is now preserved in the Egyptian National Library. The year 323 Hijri witnessed the last known use of papyrus for writing as of now, as that century would be the last to witness the manufacturing of papyrus paper. With these words, we toured around the world of ancient papers, and in our modern times, we witnessed its great legacy, and in the lives of the ancients, it was a point of skill and craftsmanship. Phenomenal human innovation was written down upon their papyri, which still shines on till this very day.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday right here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up on today's show. As Donald Trump takes to social media to thank supporters and the Secret Service, I'll be speaking to his pastor to find out how the former president is holding up after a second attempt on his life. Also ahead, I'll be speaking to the human rights activist and philanthropist Martin Luther King III about political violence in the United States and what it means for this election. And as lawmakers call for additional security measures for the former president, we ask, how did a gunman get that close to a presidential candidate? Welcome. Thanks for joining us. The second attempted assassination of Donald Trump at the former president's international golf club in West Palm Beach, Florida, has gripped the world today. This comes just 2 months since Donald Trump was shot at a rally in Pennsylvania, and this latest incident is raising some very serious questions about the safety of US presidential candidates. Well, for more, we can cross to Washington and speak to our correspondent there, Caroline Malone. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Caroline. Another major incident surrounding Donald Trump's security. Any further details emerging as to just what happened on Sunday?
Well, we've actually heard on Monday itself that the suspect, Ryan Wesley Roth, has actually appeared in court, in a federal court in Florida. He has been charged with possession of weapons and also possession of a weapon in which the serial number was disguised. So it sounds like illegal possession of weapons there. It's also been revealed that actually he has had convictions in the past. He has also faced the law before. This is not his first time in a courtroom, but indeed, we found guilty on these charges and potentially, suspected attempted assassination of Trump. He could be in jail for a very long time. We'll find out in a couple of weeks. He's been arraigned from that courtroom and he will appear again in a couple of weeks. Now, in terms of the events from Sunday, it appears that Secret Service saw him ahead of Trump arriving at that part of the golf course. They were sweeping areas of the golf course ahead of where Trump was playing. They saw the barrel of a gun sticking out through a fence into the bushes, into the golf course. They actually opened fire onto this suspect. He fled, though. He managed to get away from the golf course. And it was thanks to a witness who appears to have identified this person and also seen the license plate of his car that then security officials were able to track him down. And they didn't track him down until he got to the neighboring county where he was, in fact, arrested. This is the second attempted assassination of Trump in just a matter of months. And of course, there'll be a lot of scrutiny on the Secret Service because of it.
OK, so this 58-year-old suspect is in custody, as you say. What more are we finding out about him and just what might have motivated him?
Well, as well as some of the criminal cases that he has been involved in the past, he's also been investigated for tax evasion and other types of crimes. He's prolific on social media as well. He posted that he voted for Trump in 2016 but was disappointed with him. He then came out more in support of the Democrats and said it was important that Trump didn't get into power again because he was a threat to democracy. That's something we've heard from candidates and they've been speaking. But actually, one of the campaigns that he's been speaking out about even more has been Ukraine. In fact, it's also believed that he went to Ukraine to try and fight and help support Ukrainian soldiers, but he wasn't allowed to take part because he was too old and didn't have any military background. So a bit of a misguided trip there, it seems. And actually, US media have interviewed some of his family members, including in Hawaii, where his son is believed to live. He's been saying about how he's a loving father and was, very surprised to hear about this court case. But certainly this is a very unusual case, quite a strange set of circumstances that's led someone like this to in fact do what he's done, and if it is as it appears, try to take out a candidate for president in the United States. But yes, he will be appearing again in court very shortly in 2 weeks, and we're likely to see him face the full force of the law.
And Caroline, it looks like now, after a second apparent assassination attempt against Donald Trump, we're entering a new and much more tense phase of the campaign. What have we been hearing from the two candidates and from their parties?
It is a very tense phase of the campaign in these final, less than 2 months until actual election day. We actually heard a short time ago from President Biden. He spoke just outside the White House to media as he was passing by. He said to them that the Secret Service need more support, the suggestion there that they need more resources to be able to do their job. And we've also heard something similar from Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, who's a Republican, saying that Donald Trump needs better security protection. I think we can all come to that conclusion, considering this is the second attempt, on his life in just a matter of months. We've also, though, heard from both candidates. We've heard from Donald Trump himself, who spoke on Sunday, and in his statement, actually, he said he was thanking all the security officials for protecting him, the law enforcement, the sheriff. The sheriff was involved in the next county in actually arresting the suspect. He said the job done was absolutely outstanding and I'm very proud to be American. So typically upbeat statement there from Donald Trump. He'd already said earlier in the day that he was fine. He wanted to stop the rumors. People close to him have said that he was clearly shaken but upbeat after this incident. We've also heard from Kamala Harris, the Democrats' candidate to be president, of course, current vice president. And she said in a statement, "I'm deeply disturbed by the possible assassination attempt on Trump. To be clear, I condemn political violence, and we must all do our part to ensure that this incident does not lead to more violence," and that she's thankful that Trump is safe. And that's the kind of messaging we've heard from both Biden and Harris as well as in the previous rally in which Trump's ear was grazed by a bullet and then someone else in the crowd was hit, really dumbing down, trying to speak out against any kind of political violence. You know, in the days after the Butler rally in Pennsylvania, Trump did speak at the Republican National Convention, and he said that it's time to unite the nation, to speak out against political violence. But I think we've seen in the weeks and months since then, you know, both candidates in particular speaking out more strongly and criticizing the other's candidate. But at the same time, you know, you've got these situations in which these candidates are vulnerable. So in some ways, I suppose it's not surprising that there are these calls now for Secret Service to up their game, for Secret Service to be more present, to have more resources in order to be able to protect these candidates, because we do still have, you know, 6-7 weeks to go. You know, there's potential for these things to happen a lot more, especially when you consider how prolific ownership of guns is in the United States and how potentially easy it would be to target someone on a golf course, as Trump was on Sunday.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to leave it there. Our correspondent in Washington, Caroline Malone, thank you very much indeed. Up next, I'm going to be speaking to the human rights activist and philanthropist Martin Luther King III. Stay with us for that.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Well, for reaction to this, I'm joined now by Professor Martin Luther King III, a human rights advocate and son of the iconic civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was sadly assassinated 56 years ago. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. Great to have you with us. Can I just start by asking for your reaction to these two attempts on Donald Trump's life in as many months?
Well, I think, first of all, a climate has been created, and it's very tragic that in the process of a political election, that violence is attempting to be engaged in. And I think we all have to examine what is going on in our society that dictates this kind of tragic behavior. And I also think that everyone needs to speak up when something like this happens, because political violence, period, should not have a place in our society or world. However, it does exist. I think it's helpful when we can tone down some rhetoric that contributes. You can't talk about civility and peace, and yet your rhetoric is about hostility and animosity and anger from any side. So, I won't speak specifically about the former president, other than to say that we're grateful that this alleged or attempted political violence, nothing has happened. And we're certainly on high alert as a society, but our society's got to do better because we are drifting into a pathway that is not sustainable. My dad used to talk about nonviolence and saying that we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence as a society. And this kind of thing, unfortunately, in terms of not understanding how to navigate in a civil way, it can be dangerous anywhere in the world. And it is happening tragically all over the world. But I think a lot of things, whatever happens in the United States, a lot of people focus on. And so if the United States is exhibiting a certain kind of behavior, then probably the world believes, okay, well, the United States is doing it, then it's all right for that to happen. And it really is not all right for uncivil behavior to occur. People get mad, so we understand that. That's okay, but you can tone down your rhetoric. You can tone down some of your activities, and we can learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. My mom and father showed us that throughout their lives, and many others in the political arena. My mom and dad were not politically elected, but they are those who've worked together in the Democratic and Republican Party over the years. That's how we've gotten anything done.
Yeah, I was going to say, from an outsider's point of view, it really does feel like the US has become increasingly polarized politically and increasingly violent in turn. So it's not just an outsider's perception. You said it there in your answer, a climate has been created in which these kind of things are happening. Who's created it?
I would say that it's been created just in general in society. This has been happening now for quite a long time. I must say that the former president is one of the largest propagators of creating certain issues because of the way he chooses to communicate. You can certainly still propagate issues in a different kind of way, and it does not exhibit this kind of crazy behavior. So it's not one side or the other. It is the total discourse. But certainly the former president has put that on steroids in terms of his activity. He'd never admit to that, of course. But you really do have to look at, Michael Jackson would say, look at the man in the mirror. Look at what you're putting out, because what you put out potentially can be what comes back to you. If you sow negative seeds, maybe negative seeds will come back to you. If you sow positive seeds, perhaps positive seeds will come back to you.
Sure. So clearly attempts on the lives of US presidents are nothing new. Really interesting to see just before that latest assassination attempt on Donald Trump, he tweeted, well, he put out on his own platform, Truth Social, I hate Taylor Swift. I mean, you don't get much more hateful hate speech than that, or much more overt hate speech than that, do you?
Well, that's what children do. When you operate from a small kid perspective, and that child needs to be corrected, by the way. So the way that he is acting as a 78-year-old man is like a 5-year-old or 7-year-old child. Children will say things respond certain ways. It is totally inappropriate, unnecessary. Because someone disagrees with your political perspective, then you come out with an attitude like that. That we are better than that. We have to rise above. And if you're going to be a leader, you have to rise above, because everybody's not going to agree with you. Leadership is responsible for bringing people together, even when you disagree.
What's been the nature of your encounters with Donald Trump? How many times, and what's been the mood like on the occasions that you've actually crossed paths?
I've only met him over the years 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 times. And 2 of those times were before he ran for president, and one of those times was the day before he was inaugurated, which happened to be the King holiday back in 2016. Actually, it was 2017. January 2017. And at that time, it was a very interesting meeting. I thought it was instructive. We were meeting about expanding voting rights. He had said that once he was actually in the Oval Office, he was going to invite us back. and we would talk more about it, but that never happened because he was not really interested in voting rights and expanding voting rights. He changed the topic to voter fraud and had been attempting to prove that fraud existed since that time. There still is very little fraud in the United States elections, less than 1%. Yes, we must clean up wherever fraud exists, if it exists. But there's not, we have created laws since that time that he was elected that make it much more difficult for people to vote, much more challenging for the precious right that we all should have. So he never was really interested, obviously, in voter expansion and voting, unless the expansion was for something that directly was going to benefit him. So I've not had any other conversations with him. I think that, whomever is the president, we must be engaged with. My father met with every president who served when he was involved in leadership, from President Eisenhower and Vice President Nixon to President Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson to President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey. Those were all the vice presidents and vice presidents during his tenure. One was Republican, that's Eisenhower and Nixon, and the other two presidents were Democratic. And he met with all of them. And I think, again, in leadership, you always have to meet with whomever is the head of state. You have to be willing to engage in the issues that you have concern about for the people of our nation.
I mean, what happened on Sunday must have automatically brought back in your mind traumatic memories of what happened 56 years ago. What did go through your mind?
Well, I think the first thing was understanding what is happening. So I didn't filter it that way because there was not an actual shooting that we could see. It was described as a shooting, and everybody wants to know, well, really what did happen. A gun was in place, a camera and other things were found, and a person was apprehended. Now, none of that did you know at first. When you first hear an assassination attempt, you wonder, what does this mean? That this has happened once before, and it looks like there's an attempt again. And what is it that is being done that creates this? And again, I think the tragedy from my perspective is that this climate is tolerated and accepted. That's why everybody has a responsibility to stand up and say, this is unacceptable ever. This is never acceptable, and it must never happen. I will say that in a climate where you have everybody can get and anybody can get guns and you have no regulations, it allows this to fester and grow. And we've got to do a better job of how weapons are dispersed and engaged. How anybody can get a gun. That's problematic, and many or some don't seem to realize that. It's fine for responsible gun owners to have guns. I think that these weapons are very specific type of weapons that have been talked about recently, which are assault weapons. Why does a person need an assault weapon, a weapon that can fire 100 bullets in so many seconds? That's kind of insane. And the definition of insanity is doing nothing or doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We have to change that by our behavior. We need to look at what kind of additional laws need to be put in place.
Just carrying on, if you'll allow me, talking about your father and what happened more than half a century ago. You were a little boy of 10 when your father was assassinated. What do you actually remember about that day?
Well, I remember actually watching the evening news at 7 p.m. On April 4th of 1968, 56 years ago. And I remember it being announced at about 7:05 p.m. that Dr. Martin Luther King has just been shot. Obviously, your heart sinks and you are frantic. I remember the four of us, we were all in the front room in our den, meaning my siblings and I, and we ran back to Mom and Dad's room, and Mom was preparing to go to Memphis to be with our dad. I remember all of that as if it was yesterday. The commotion, the many people who just started coming to our home. And I remember that whole period, which was obviously a very dark and difficult period for us. I remember a few days after Dad was killed, my mother went to Memphis to lead a march that he was to have led. And she took the three older ones of us, my older sister Yolanda, and my younger brother Dexter, and I. Bernice, my younger sister, stayed in Atlanta. And we came back. That was on April 8th. He was killed April 4th. April 9th, he was eulogized and his funeral took place. But my mother continued in that tradition and led that march. And no one had been captured for his murder. And so I remember almost each one of those days what happened, not every moment of the day. I was hoping that it was just a bad dream. But every day when I would awaken, that bad dream became tragic reality.
It's been just over 60 years since that iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." What do you think your father would make of the state of race relations in the United States in the 21st century?
Well, he'd be very disappointed, but not deterred, because he understood that, every victory that existed. I mean, the goal is to create a nation and world where freedom and justice and equality becomes real for all humankind. We've not reached that mark yet. We've achieved a number of things, certainly from an individual perspective. But when we look at a collective perspective in terms of disparities and poverty in America, when we look at the triple evils that he defined as the evil of poverty, the evil of racism, and the evil of violence and militarism, when you look at those triple evils, unfortunately, it feels as if we've not made the kind of progress that we should have. And we have to figure out, how do we create that climate so that the quality of people's lives can be risen? How do we create a society where racism is abolished and gone? How do we create a society where poverty is reduced? In the wealthiest country on the planet, the United States of America, it is unconscionable that we have thousands and millions of people living in poverty. Some would say over 100 million people who are living at or below the poverty level. That is unacceptable in a country where people have trillion-dollar budgets. There are there's a federal budget that's trillions of dollars, and you have corporation budgets that are billions of dollars. And when you add that all collectively, it's a super amount of trillions of dollars. How do you justify having poverty? There's something wrong with that, and we have not focused on that issue. And we've got to address that, because our society will not be sustainable if we don't figure out at least how we reduce it significantly. The ability is there to do that. We just hadn't identified the will. When ability and will become one, it yields results.
And in terms of fulfilling that dream that your father envisaged, do you think Kamala Harris is the sort of president who might be able to deliver?
Well, I certainly believe that the Vice President Harris, has demonstrated in a very short period of time that she intends to build a team that certainly can help to pursue that dream and vision that Dad had for all people, of freedom, justice, and equality for all humankind, creating opportunity and options, creating more jobs, addressing climate issues that exist in our society. also reaching across the aisle and working with those who have a different philosophical point of view. That's what we need in leadership, someone who brings us together, not someone who creates barriers and builds walls, but someone who builds bridges. So I certainly believe the vice president is demonstrated throughout her career, from being a district attorney at a local level to the state's attorney, the attorney general for the state of California, then becoming a United States senator, and then the vice president of the United States. She's consistently demonstrated the leadership that I think is needed for such a time as this.
But don't you think your father would be heartened by the fact that the United States has already had one black president who served 2 terms, and we might be just a month and a half or so away from a second black president being elected, and a woman at that? What do you think he'd make of that? Do you think he'd be surprised, or would he consider that, do you think, just the natural extension of his life's work?
No, I don't think he would be surprised at all. I think the only thing that probably would be a surprise was that it has taken this long to elect a woman. He'd be very pleased that it happens to be a black and an Asian woman. But the fact that we as a nation have purported to be all of these things, and 2024, we're just now getting to the fact where there's a good possibility, a decent possibility, that we will elect a woman. So that would probably be surprising, because he would have thought that had already happened, I believe. But I also think Dad was an optimist. And so his objective always was to create the kind of climate, as I say, where we could disagree if we had to, without being disagreeable, without diminishing someone's character, without denigrating someone. It was really about, how do we lift people up? How do we bring all boats, create that climate where all boats can rise? And that's what he and my mom did throughout their lives. That's the leadership that they provided. So again, Dad would be extraordinarily proud of what the United States is poised to do. And he'd be very concerned, however, that regardless of the outcome of this election, still 50% of the country is going to initially be unhappy. So it really is about building these bridges and bringing people in who felt left out. And that's part of the challenge. That's probably the biggest challenge. How do you bring disparate positions together and move forward in a way? Somebody's always going to be unhappy. So you can't create utopia, but you can create an opportunity for people to be heard, respected, treated like human beings, treated with dignity. That's what my father and mother were about.
And you've obviously made it your life's work to carry on promoting much of what your father believed in. And you've got a teenage daughter as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like she's going to carry on your life's work and also that of your father's.
Well, we're very, very excited and proud of our daughter. She's 16 years old, and she's been involved in the struggle since she was maybe 5, 6, 7 years old. And so if she chooses to continue that work, and hopefully she will, we're going to do all we can to support her. We never tell her what to do. These are things that she's identified, from climate change to, gun regulations, responsible gun legislation, to, there's just a variety of issues that she herself has raised. The issue of poverty, she's very concerned about. So hopefully she will always want to work to create a better nation and world for all of God's children. And we're very pleased and proud of who she is.
Do you think she feels a bit of pressure as the granddaughter to carry that mantle?
I'm sure she does, but she carries it very well so that it doesn't seem like it. One of the things she said some years ago was she was asked, does she want to continue to work with her grandparents and walk in their footsteps? And she said, yes, I want to do that, but I also want to make my own footsteps. So I thought as a kid to think about, these are things I want to do. Not that it's not a continuation of what my grandparents did, Yes, I would say there is pressure, but I think she navigates through it very well.
She's right, isn't she? Because, of course, the world in 2024 is, significantly different than it was in the 1960s. So she's talking more about an extension rather than a copy-paste of her grandfather's and her father's legacy.
Well, that's correct. She has so many ideas. She's extraordinarily creative, and she's collaborative. And that's a good trait to always have when you inherently want to work with others. Leadership does demand that you make sometimes difficult decisions. But if you're able to make those decisions in conjunction with others and help others to come around to certain positions, I think that's a good thing.
Now, this might not be true, so correct me if I'm wrong if it isn't, but when you were born, your mother was reportedly concerned that it would be a burden for you to carry the name that you've carried, and you've had more than 60 years now to reflect on this as a thinking human being. Has this been a burden for you?
So, I never looked at it as a burden from a young age. I think my mother liberated me, and what I mean by that is she said, Martin, you don't have to go to Morehouse College. You don't have to become a minister. You don't have to become a civil and human rights activist. Just be your best self, and we will support you. I ended up going to Morehouse College. I have been involved in civil and human rights. So some of the things that she said I don't have to do unless you want to, I chose those paths. But I'm thankful that she gave me that freedom, because had she been putting the burden on me, saying, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to be this, that would have been a very miserable set of circumstances. But to allow a child, a young person, to become themselves, and that's the kind of environment we are working to create for our daughter. But you're right, my mom was concerned in 1957. Dad was leading the Montgomery bus boycott, or in 1955, actually. He had led that bus boycott for 381 days. So Mom saw how he emerged as a leader and was known around the community and began to be known around the nation. And she didn't want me to have to carry that burden. But of course, they did choose to name me after Dad. And I think she prepared me as best I can. So I always try to look at it as a blessing and not a burden. I think it's your frame of perspective and reference, because if you think about what is a burden, that's the way you act. But if you think about the many blessings that are derived from using your platform in a positive way, that's wonderful.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. Martin Luther King III, human rights advocate and son of the iconic civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to Al Arabiya News. I'm joined now from South Carolina by a close friend and spiritual advisor to Donald Trump, Pastor Mark Burns. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, and welcome to Al Arabiya News. Can I just start by asking you, when did you last speak to Mr. Trump, and how do you think he's feeling at the moment?
Well, yesterday, he feels obviously very strong. This is a second assassination attempt on his life. This is a clear indication that there are outside forces all the way back from 2016 until now that does not want Donald J. Trump to come back to power, simply because he's one of the few politicians and few leaders to actually give power back to the American people and away from the corporate entities. And they are doing whatever they can to stop this man from doing just that. But clearly, like the book of Isaiah said, and I said this to the president, I reminded him of this. Isaiah says, no weapon formed against you will prosper. He will live and not die.
I just want to ask you where you were when you first heard this news. How did you hear it?
Well, I was with my church. We had just gotten out of church, and I was with several of my staff members at church dinner when I had got the word that there were shots fired near the president. It was before it even broke to the news. And so it was obviously alarming. And at first, I'm thinking, how could this have happened again? What is happening? How has this guy, how does an AK-47 get 200 to 400 meters away close to the president? How is this happening? How does this keep happening? The fact that I'm very happy the Secret Service moved in quickly, returned fire in that direction, got the president on the ground, then got the president out of the area. They've done a great job in protecting his life again. But you have to ask yourself, why does this keep happening? How are they able to get even that close with the AK-47? It makes no sense to me. But I was completely alarmed, but not surprised, because they have been doing things like this. The opposition have been doing things like this for such a long time. And when you have people like Kamala Harris, who are on the national stage telling the whole world that Donald J. Trump is a threat to democracy and a threat to America, that is clearly inciting violence. That is clearly inciting and inspiring others to take up violence against Donald Trump to try to take him out. They want to complain about what happened in J6, but those liberal Democrats are extremely violent with their rhetoric, extremely violent, and causing a lot of this violence to take place against Donald Trump and people who are close to him. That is coming from the left, not from the right.
So just to be clear on this, you're attributing or apportioning blame, at least in part, to Kamala Harris for this latest attempt on Donald Trump's life.
Well, if Kamala Harris and those that are a part of her party on the left can say Donald Trump caused J6, or people like me who declared, give me liberty or give me death, which is quoted from one of our founding fathers, one of our framers, to say I incited violence and caused and inspired the J6 to take place. I said it on J5 and spoke on J6. And for them to say that, well, then, yeah, I absolutely blame Kamala Harris and those that are like her, that are calling for the death of Donald Trump, calling for the removal of Donald Trump, calling him a threat to American democracy, calling him, the number one enemy to America. Saying rhetoric like that will inspire people who are not all together to pick up their weapon and try to take Donald Trump out. And both people, both would-be assassins, are not supporters of the Republican Party. They're not supporters of Donald J. Trump. They're not supporters of the conservative movement. They are people that are on the left. So this is clear indication that those words, those violent words that are coming from Kamala Harris and others like her, are inspiring people to take up arms, to do harm to Donald Trump and people who are close to him. And the scary part about it, not all of us have Secret Service, right? None of us have Secret Service. And a good job to the Secret Service agent, for protecting my friend and doing a great job to make sure that he is safe and his family is safe. But we don't have that. And to me, I think they're putting our lives in danger by consistently using violent rhetoric, like Nancy Pelosi said and Maxine Waters said. And when you see a Trump supporter, you let them know that they are not welcome where you are. I mean, these are the type of words that are coming from elected officials from the left who are clearly using violent rhetoric to show their disdain for what Donald Trump stands for and what we as Americans and patriots stand for on the right.
Sure, I mean, they're showing their disdain for him and making no secret of it. But just to be clear, they're not calling for anyone to try to kill him, are they? Well,
I mean, again, go back and look at Kathy Griffin, the comedian Kathy Griffin. She had a head remember that, right? These are language that are coming from people on the left. Madonna, right? Kathy Griffin, the comedian, had a head that looked like Donald Trump and had it cut off, fake blood. This has been going on for a long time. This just didn't start. We have not been saying anything like that about Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That type of a rhetoric has not been coming from those of us on the right. That violent, evil rhetoric has been coming solely from those on the left. Go back and look at the riots that took place in Baltimore, right? When people were getting killed, violence, burning down houses. All of this is coming from the right. Coming from the left. We don't burn down our own cities in the right side. We don't. We have a protest, and it was a peaceful protest until we believe it was infiltrated by outside forces to help incite violence. But for the most part, we have marches all over the United States of America promoting our conservative movement, and we're not burning down any cities. So the violence is coming from the left, and it's just getting started. And it's a dangerous time for America now, because this is a second attempt on the leading candidate for president of the United States of America by many polls, leading, and will be the 47th president of the United States of America, the greatest political comeback in U.S. history. But yet, again, this is a second assassination attempt. It's very dangerous for America.
Sure. I mean, just to be clear as well, I mean, the polls are changing as each day goes by, and not all the polls I've seen have Donald Trump in the lead. But just going back to what you were saying, I mean, we are talking about a United States that is extremely disunited. It's a profoundly divided nation. And if I just took what you said earlier and copied and pasted it and took out the left and replaced it with the right, I mean, basically someone on the left would say exactly what you'd said, but say that all the hateful rhetoric, all the violent rhetoric is coming from people on the right. It's not us. I mean, how do we get out of this situation we're in right now? What's the way out?
Well, we first stop trying to kill Donald Trump with a bullet. Let's start there, okay? All right. Let's stop trying to assassinate the man and allow him to live life peacefully and allow him to continue to help make America great again without trying to assassinate him. Number two, again, I don't quite know. I know I don't really know where you're located at, but I'm here in America, and I see firsthand. I've traveled with the team and the president firsthand. I've spoken at so many of his rallies firsthand. And I know the legacy media will report things that are contrary to what actually happened. Right? They have their own agenda. Matter of fact, we just look at how ABC News treated Donald Trump during this debate. It was a complete sham. It was a complete 3 against 1. The ABC moderators and Kamala Harris against Donald J. Trump by himself. And he held his own like he always done. He's a lion. This is what you have experienced. Matter of fact, you having people within the ABC organization are now admitting that they were instructed to only fact check Donald Trump, never to fact check Kamala Harris. So this is exactly what Donald Trump has been going up against. So when the media begin to talk about like it's fact, like, well, this is what the right is saying and this is what the media is reporting. No, absolutely not. We don't burn down our houses. We don't burn down our cities. We don't kill our own people. Right? That's what's happening on the left side when they are angry about a political decision, right? That's what's taking place in America, but yet that doesn't get reported. But the reality of it is Donald J. Trump is the only person between the death of democracy and the continuation of this republic. We believe that. Why? Because he's putting the power back in the hands of the regular American people. That's why he's so supported, even after all of these negative things that has come out against him, after all of the negative rhetoric that's coming out against him. Every media outlet is going to report that Donald Trump is losing. That's what they do. They did it in 2016. They did it in 2020, and they're going to continue to do it now because they are not They do not desire for Donald Trump to be the president. They are all against him, and that is fact. You can look at it for yourself. But yet Donald Trump still packs out arenas. Kamala Harris says that people are leaving Donald Trump's rallies and they're bored and they're not, and he's not talking about him or them or us. The rallies are always packed. The lines are extremely long. She's describing her own rallies, right? The rallies that she has to bust people in, the rallies that she has to pay people to come and show up to because she won't have a large crowd. Donald Trump is doing this everywhere he goes, and he's been doing it for 8 years. People want Donald Trump to be the next president of the United States of America. Kamala Harris is more of the same of what Joe Biden's weak Joe Biden policies, weak immigration policies, weak economical policies. We will get more of the same of Joe Biden and Barack Obama. The world wants President Trump back.
Just before that incident on the golf course on Sunday, Donald Trump put out on Truth Social some quite simple words. I hate Taylor Swift. Now, as a religious man, I wonder, as an advisor as well of Donald Trump, would you advise him to put out those kind of words? It's clearly...
Well, no, of course not.
I mean, it's hate speech, isn't it?
Of course not.
That's hate speech.
Well, I mean, that's not necessarily hate speech. I mean, that's a
he hates her.
Right. They have a right to suggest, I mean, because we get hate all the time, right? I mean, we hate the sin and not the sinner, but we hate sin. Right. And I don't call it so much hate speech, even though I would have suggested him not to say that. Right. I would have suggested if he asked me, should I say this, which he doesn't, because he's his own man. He's a pit bull. But if he would have asked me, would this been good? I would have suggested no, not because you don't want to say publicly you hate somebody, even though they hate us, even though they're very bold in saying how much they hate Donald Trump and how much they hate people like me on social media. We get rhetoric like this every single day, has been for the last 8 years. And the closer you are to the president, the more hate speech you get. But people don't talk about that. It's acceptable because the media does not like Donald Trump. So it's acceptable to call me a coon, right, which is a racially derogatory term. It's acceptable to call me, a charlatan and a grifter and a con man and all of these negative things that happens on a daily basis. I hope you die. I hope you hang yourself. I hope somebody puts a bullet in your head. I mean, these are comments that I get, and I'm not even the president. So I can only imagine what the president gets on a daily basis of how much consistent evil rhetoric that we get from the left side, who are constantly not only pushing their hateful agenda, but they are actually doing it. I mean, we had an incident where somebody opened up our gas leakage on our bus one time, right? The incidents that has happened like that over the years because people cannot stand the Make America Great Again message because it is putting the power back in the hands of the people and removing it from the corporate interests of America. That's why the people are holding up Donald Trump and the voice of God is holding up Donald Trump. I would have suggested not to say that, but I can understand because people like Taylor Swift use rhetoric like this all the time to attack us. But again, if the president would have asked me, I would have said, stay away from using that type of rhetoric. But that's because I'm a pastor. He's not a pastor. He's not the pastor of the United States of America. He would be the president. He was the president of the United States of America and will be the next president of the United States of America.
Just to give the other side to the story, I mean, obviously, on the Democratic side, we've heard leaders like Kamala Harris, Joe Biden saying there is no place for violence. We condemn violence. We're relieved to know that Donald Trump is safe. That's the kind of language they use. So it wasn't entirely inflammatory. But just moving on, I'd just like to ask you, as we're running out of time, do you think the security that is provided to Donald Trump as a former U.S. president is adequate?
Well, I mean, I think there's some major questions. Again, I'm not here to speak ill against the brave men and women of the Secret Service that protect President Trump and his family, those that would take a bullet for him, those that would die for him, and those that every day put their lives on the line. And that goes for all law enforcement officers and first responders here in America. And so I'm not here to say something negative about them, but you do have to ask yourself the real question. How has this happened a second time? Why was an individual after somebody who almost killed him. I mean, very close, nipped his ear. Just a hair over would have shot him right in the face, like what happened to Dr. King. And you got to ask yourself, how has a person with an AK-47 able to get that close again to Donald Trump? And clearly there's some holes somewhere that needs to be examined and needs to be plugged, because apparently they're just not going to stop. And obviously we don't operate in the spirit of fear, because God didn't give us the spirit of fear. But you have to begin to wonder, again, why does this keep happening? And I know that people will say and do things all the time, but I mean, we have a very smart Secret Service agency, and we have a very strong protective details. I've seen it firsthand. Matter of fact, I'm wearing a Secret Service pin right now that's given to me only by a Secret Service agent when you're that close to the president, and they will hand it to you as a sign of support. It's very valuable American flag pin with the star of the Secret Service on it. That I'm proud of what they've. But I'm very concerned, like millions of Americans are very concerned that how does this keep happening? Why haven't we been able to pick these people off, like in most cases, before they even get there? We're monitoring social media. We're monitoring phone records. We're monitoring things of that nature for people that come on the radar and people that are showing signs that they may be doing some type of a harm to one of our world leaders. And so, again, how did the AK-47 get that close to President Donald Trump while he's playing golf? That's the question that needs to be asked, and I hope they answer it soon.
Yeah, you raised a really important question there. We're just out of time, but I want to ask you before we go. We've heard from one of Donald Trump's other good friends, Chris Ruddy, who is the CEO of Newsmax, and he said today these attempts on Donald Trump's life may have had a spiritual impact on him. I just want to ask you, do you agree with that? And is Donald Trump a very spiritual man?
Well, again, I'm not going to get too detailed about his spiritual walk with the Lord Jesus Christ, but I can tell you he believes in the Lord Jesus. He is saved. He has accepted Master Jesus as his Lord and his Savior. He is very aware that God has spared his life on multiple occasions. And these last two occasions are no different from what God, that just shows the hand of God is upon his life. And the hand of God is sparing Donald Trump for such a time as this. And the fact that he keeps moving forward, that is a clear sign to me. And again, my private conversations with him is a clear sign that this man loves God. And he's very aware that there's a higher purpose involved that's bigger than just his name, Donald Trump. But he is a servant of the people. And he's been called by God to serve the people of this nation and to serve the people of this world. Because remember, Donald Trump in power is a safer United States of America and a safer world. We see that happen with weak Joe Biden and his weak policies. They do not respect America. Russia attacks Ukraine. China is threatening to attack Singapore. North Korea is shooting missiles over South Korea on a regular basis now. But prior to that, Donald Trump had peace. They knew he would send a picture of kill Soleimani quickly. They knew he would send a picture of a Taliban leader's home and say, touch our American soldiers. We know where you live at. We will take your whole home out. And they knew he would do it. And so, again, like President Ronald Reagan said, it was peace through strength. Naturally, we don't want violence. We don't want no one to die. I'm not advocating for violence at all. But the reality of it is those that live by the sword, the Bible says, will die by the sword. So there's repercussions and consequences for those that pick up the sword and try to do harm to American interests and the American sovereignty. And when President Trump was in office, the world knew that. So that made a safer world. The president most definitely knows the hand of God is upon his life and has spared him, not just in these last two occasions, but in other occasions where he could have died. But God has kept him for such a time as this and protected him with a hedge of protection, just like he did Job. There's a hedge of protection around President Trump. And as I said to him yesterday, no weapon formed against you will prosper. And I believe that. I believe God has protected him for such a time as this to help save America.
Yeah, just for the benefit of our viewers, China is threatening Taiwan, not Singapore. Lastly,
I said Taiwan. I meant Taiwan.
That's all right.
So sorry.
I just wanted to make sure.
Singapore yesterday in the interview, but you're correct. It is Taiwan. Oh, I did it again.
That's all right. That's all right. I just wanted to make sure our viewers didn't think there was a geopolitical development that hadn't been.
Singapore, it's Taiwan. Yes,
absolutely.
And those microchips.
Yeah, exactly. Just lastly, before we let you go, do you have a message to America to make sure we draw a line under this kind of uptick in political violence and that we make sure that there are no future attempts on the lives of Donald Trump or indeed any other prominent political figures in the United States?
Well, I mean, violence doesn't play no part, it should not play no part in American politics or American culture. It's never worked. Americans should pull from the strength of people like Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King and their nonviolence approach. That's what moves mountains. Violence never moves mountains. It only creates more bloodshed. And the message to the American people is this. This nation was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. We got to get back to that, which is peace, love, kindness to our brothers and sisters, regardless if we agree. I don't agree with the things of the left, but I am not advocating any type of violence for anyone, whether they be gay, whether they be straight, whether they be black, white, Muslim, Christian, or Jew, Hindu, it doesn't matter. I don't desire no death to no one or violence to no one just because we have a difference in ideology. So we got to get back to that. These United States of America, where we will focus more on where we're common and not where we're different. You may disagree with those on the left. You may disagree with those on the right, but wish no harm to your fellow brothers and sisters. We all are Americans. We have a difference of opinion, but that's what makes us great. That's what makes this American experience great, that we are a republic and the greatest nation in the world. And so my fellow Americans, keep peace, love your fellow brothers and your sisters. In the end, we're all Americans.
Well, that's a great note for us to wrap up on. Thank you very much indeed. A close friend and spiritual advisor to Donald Trump, Pastor Mark Burns. Thank you very much indeed.
Happy to be here. Thank you, sir.
The question on the minds of millions of people across the United States and far beyond is this. How did a gunman get that close to a presidential candidate? Well, to help us answer that question, I'm joined now by the former bodyguard and Secret Service agent who served under President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama, Barry Donadio. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, what is your assessment based on what we know so far? Was this a failing on the part of the Secret Service, or was it a success in the sense that they were steps ahead of the gunman and they essentially prevented him from doing what he was clearly trying to do?
Right, obviously a success. We have a president that remained unharmed. The threat was detected. It was detected because of the extra assets that they probably assigned to the Secret Service protective detail since the Pennsylvania incident. I understand, at least it's being said, that there was some sort of an advance team or maybe a team conducting a sweep, and they detected somebody with a rifle. So I would imagine they did what I would have done, which is engaged the gunman, and when he didn't comply with any verbal order to drop the weapon, they probably shot, as I would have shot. And the rest is history, as we know. And the other thing is we have to thank also the coordination with the local police. They did an excellent job. And we have to remember the person that took the picture and relayed the description of the person as well as the license plate number. That person there is a hero, and I wish every citizen would do the same thing when they see something suspicious. There would be a lot of crime solved. So there's a lot of heroes involved here. Kudos to the United States Secret Service. They saved the president's life. Kudos to local law enforcement. We don't know what true part they also had in saving the president's life, but they certainly apprehended the bad guy, and they did it even without hurting him. So it's a win situation all the way around.
From your understanding, just how close did the suspected gunman get to the former President Donald Trump?
So I've heard between 400 and 500 meters. Now, if the assailant has a pistol, that's not as much as a threat, right? Because it would be nearly impossible to hit something that far away with a pistol. But when we have a high-powered rifle, which to me, I've seen the picture, it looks like a AK-47 with a different type of stock that was added after purchase to make it more accurate, like an accurized AK-47. That bullet there is basically a .308 short. That thing is an incredibly powerful round. It has the capability of shooting armor-piercing rounds. The magazine that was in the firearm had 30-round magazine, but that gun also has a capability to shoot a 75-round magazine and a 100-round magazine. So that was a sniper. This is an attempted assassination of the former president. And if the president got by, if they did not detect him, he would have opened up fire when the president got closer, and he may have been successful.
And when we think of a golf course, we're talking obviously about a pretty large area. I mean, that represents a real challenge, doesn't it, for the Secret Service to try to secure such an enormous perimeter of that sort of size?
Right. Distance protects a protectee like it did here. He never got close enough to really be an extreme threat to the president. Now, if we have a trained sniper, we know that a trained sniper can shoot a very long distance. This obviously is not a trained sniper. This is somebody that it looks like he put together a whole bunch of stuff to attempt a sniping event. But I don't think he had the means to pull it off. Could he have done it? Yes. But it's not impossible to secure a golf course. You get enough people out there, enough resources. Now we have drone technology. That's something that we weren't doing when I was in, at least not in any capacity that they would be able to do today. So there are a lot of resources. You just got to get them in there. And with this man, with this president, it's now become, unfortunately, fashionable for copycat people that, hey, let me take a potluck shot at President Trump, and maybe I'll hit him, and maybe I'll get on the news. But I wish people would think a little bit about that, because, this man, he decided to do this. He's going to be in jail for a very, very long time. I don't think he's going to get out, and he may die in jail. I just don't think it was all worth it. But again, the Secret Service, it can be done. It's a large area, enough agents and enough resources, enough special teams in there. They got the job done.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little later on, but let's get to that question now about how this could inspire copycat attempts on Donald Trump's life, or indeed the lives of any other prominent political figures in the United States. Do you think that is a reality, that, based on what happened in July, here we are in September, someone potentially inspired by events in July? Do you think that was a part of it, and that we might see more of this in the future, therefore?
Yeah, anything is possible. We don't know if this is a state-sponsored attack. We don't know if this is a lone wolf. We don't know if this is a militia, an organization. We won't know for a while. The investigation is not complete. But, it breeds copycats. After the last assassination attempt, I predicted there would be a potential copycat. I still say that even now. There may even be a third attempt, and that's why the government needs to be very careful how we proceed forward with all of the candidates, not just Donald Trump. If a hair gets hurt on the head of any of our political candidates moving forward, that could be a real problem in this country. It doesn't matter which one either. Either one, the stakes are way too high. So the Secret Service is probably sitting at a big table right now with a lot of very smart people thinking exactly what I'm just saying, and probably agreeing with what I'm saying. What are they going to do to up the stake and make it close to impossible to do anything, hurt, harm, injure Kamala Harris, President Donald Trump, and let's not forget Joe Biden as well.
Just looking at the profile of the suspected gunman, any obvious red flags based on what we know at this stage, which I admit is not a huge amount?
The red flag, he's a peculiar individual by looking at him through pictures, not your everyday, dad, husband. He seems to be involved in some extraordinary things. I understand he's recruiting people to go to Ukraine. These are secondhand reports, unconfirmed. They don't know for sure. It seems a little bizarre. I have heard that the media has spoken to his son. His son couldn't believe what happened, had no idea he would do this. So there's a lot of questions that are going to have to be answered moving forward. I think it's going to unfold in the next few hours, if not the next few days. And we will all learn little by little about exactly what's going on. But there is something certain. This has not really ever happened before. This should be a real eye-opener for all protective agencies around the world that protect their leaders. This stuff is getting more tense, and more resources need to be thrown to protect their protectors.
At the moment, Donald Trump gets the same level of security as any other former US president, I believe, and do correct me if I'm wrong. There are people out there, notably Congressman Nick Langworthy, saying Trump should have the same security levels afforded to a sitting president to ensure his safety. Would you back those calls?
Yeah, I would back it, because there are different levels of protection. There is the U.S. president, whoever is in the office, and whoever it is, it could be Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, or even Joe Biden. But whoever is the elected president gets the presidential security package. I cannot elaborate on the exact coverage of security and what is provided, but I can only tell you that it is different. And what I'm saying from this point on, because of the tenseness in this country and the stakes being so high, the environment, the political environment, I think they need to all have the same level of protection. Now, keep in mind that it's a huge amount of resources, a huge amount of money. There's only so many people that go around that can do certain skilled jobs. So it is a tough task. I think after this, what we're going to see, when it's all said and done, maybe 2025, you're going to see a bigger Secret Service. I think they're just going to have to do it, because this is the world we live in.
Sure. And just going back to your days as a Secret Service agent, did you ever have to deal with any comparable incidents whilst you were serving under President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama, or perhaps you're not allowed to say?
No, absolutely. We've encountered some people, even which sounds simple, but it's really an attack. Somebody jumping over the fence to get into the White House is an attack on the White House. Theoretically, if you think of it, it's a penetration. So I've dealt with stuff like that. And that is, these things can be life-changing events. You have to go out and challenge somebody who you don't know if they have a gun. They've already jumped the fence to try to come into the White House. They're on the White House property. Are they there to hurt me? Are they there to hurt the president? Do they have a gun? Do they have a bomb on them? You don't know if you're going to live if you even touch them or your next move. So this position, all men and women in the United States Secret Service, they live day by day exactly with what I said. Any of these incidents can happen at any second.
Sure, and part of being a protection agent or bodyguard is that you would be psychologically prepared, wouldn't you, to take a bullet for the person you're protecting?
That's absolutely right. If need be, yes. But the idea would be stop the threat before any bullet has to be taken. So through our methods and operations, it shouldn't have to get to that point. Yes, things happen like we saw with President Reagan and even President Trump. You have to prepare for the unpredictable and be ready. And that's why they train in case something happens, in case a shot is fired, like in Pennsylvania. The agents are trained to evacuate him and do what you saw them do. They did everything they were supposed to do, given what the cards they were dealt on the day in Pennsylvania. So it is a highly intensive agency. The agency reinvents itself weekly. It's one of the finest agencies on planet Earth. It is a trustworthy agency. They train more than any law enforcement agency I know. I was on a special team, emergency response team. That is the best of the best. I was armed with a Fabrique Nationale P90 submachine gun to be able to repel tactical threats to the President of the United States.
A really big difference between what happened on Sunday and what happened in July is that July was a public rally. It was an event that people clearly knew about and would have known about, whereas Sunday, this was Donald Trump going about his private life, playing around at golf. Does that suggest to you that there are some leaks and that perhaps that information found its way into the public domain by means in which it should not have done?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's the question I want answered. How did this man know that President Trump was on the golf course at all? Now, the president may have announced it. I don't know for certain, but he doesn't announce every move he makes necessarily. So if it's an unannounced trip and this gunman happened to be there waiting for him, there are some intelligence questions that need to be answered. The FBI is going to get hot and heavy on this, and we're going to have to find out, is this a former employee of the golf course? Does he know people? Does he know somebody in the police that maybe tipped him off and inadvertently, unwittingly, never would have expected this man to go and do this? Who knows? I'm just speculating, but these are just examples of what it could be. But that is a question that we all need to ask. The media needs to ask that question. We need to get to the bottom of it.
Sure. We're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, though. Former Secret Service agent Barry Donadio, thank you very much for speaking to Al Arabiya News. Well, let's get some more perspective now. I'm joined by the former FBI Specialist Agent Michael Tabman. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First up, any new details emerging as to just what happened on Sunday?
Well, I've seen no new details other than the fact that we had a potential shooter, again, within 300 to 500 yards of the former president. Only this time, unlike the fiasco in Pennsylvania, Secret Service did a great job in spotting the threat and eliminating it before any shots could be fired.
So you would categorize this as having been a success story rather than a case of failings on the part of the Secret Service?
Yeah, it would be. Again, someone might ask, how did the person get in? But we have to look at, again, the totality of the facts. You have a golf course, which is an open, sprawling area, clearly not designed to provide security. It was not cordoned off as it would be for a sitting president. And it'd be very hard in reality to create a perimeter that someone couldn't somehow get through, when they're dedicated to doing so. So they did the right thing of watching his front, watching his back, scouting out for dangers and spotting that danger.
I mean, this raises a couple of questions. First of all, does Donald Trump need to change his day-to-day activities? Should he be playing golf if it's that difficult to secure the perimeter of a golf course? And the other question it raises is, does Donald Trump have adequate protection in his capacity as former US president and potentially as a future US president? What's your answer to those two questions?
On the first question, as far as golfing goes, if you're not in a secure area, if you're in a public golf course, sitting president, potential president, it is a security challenge. And now, in light of these, 2 attempts within 2 months, I think, we may have to change the protocol. But presidents golf, former presidents golf, we know that. I don't think that's going to stop, and they're not going to let themselves have their activities dictated by this threat, which is a good thing for the United States. So Secret Service is going to have to just be more aware of these threats and take the protective action as they took now. Now, as far as Donald Trump personally goes, the Secret Service has a protective detail based on their established protocol. And within that protocol, obviously, there's some, room for maneuverability. They could add more people. They could change some of the physical protective structures, things like that. But they have a protocol of what they do for a sitting president versus a candidate. I don't know that a former president has any special status. But in light of what's happened, they may have to revisit those protocols and change how they handle protection for a sitting president as well as a potential president, and in which case then they would need certainly a bump up in the manpower, because it is manpower intensive.
And just referring to the fact that, Donald Trump was on a golf course, an unannounced game of golf, we assume. I don't think Donald Trump announces he's going to play golf. One of the questions we've been raising this evening is, does this suggest that there is somehow a leak coming from President Trump's entourage? Somehow this man, the gunman, the suspected gunman, was aware that Donald Trump would be where he was when he was. Does that raise any concerns as far as you're concerned? Does that sound to you like there's a leak?
And, I heard that, and one would consider, did that happen? But even if he didn't announce it, once Donald Trump who's a high-profile individual, even as an individual, not a past president or presidential candidate, shows up with an entourage, a Secret Service agent, word is going to get out fast. Now, I don't know where this guy was when he heard about it, if he was close by, whatever, but it gets out quickly. And that would give him time to respond. Golf is a slow-moving game. Your pattern of movement is predictable. And therefore, that would have given him enough time once he heard that Donald Trump was there to grab his weapon and set up a position undetected. Again, they did the right thing, the Secret Service, with the manpower they had, scouting forward and keeping the former president secure. But I think it could have stayed a secret for very long, given who he was and what the appearance would be with this army of Secret Service agents with him.
And given, as you've said, that golf is a difficult game to provide security for, as you say, you mentioned some very good points there. It's a predictable game. You know where the player is going to be from start to finish, pretty much. I mean, given the temperature of the political climate in the United States right now, given that we're just 5-6 weeks away from Election Day, and given that the fact that the FBI is stretched pretty thin, we understand that resources aren't quite as forthcoming as perhaps many inside the service would like them to be. Should Donald Trump, therefore, stop playing golf, at least for the next 6 weeks?
That would be my personal suggestion, and I'm sure it's been suggested to him. But look at Donald Trump. He's someone who's not going to let himself get intimidated by that kind of threat. I think he kind of, likes the fact that he could say that he survived these. It's certainly good politically. And, luckily nothing happened. But I don't see him backing down or changing his routine, irrespective of the advice he gets not to do so.
Yeah, I mean, some people might say that Donald Trump being who he is, and given the climate right now, I mean, nowhere is completely safe, is it?
No, nowhere is. Even as we see the campaign, and no venue is completely secure. Again, indoors is easier to secure. Obviously, we can monitor people on the inside, but there's always an area, that someone could find a candidate. They have to go out there and press the flesh. They have to have their rallies, give speeches. And again, something like Pennsylvania never should have happened. But historically speaking, the Secret Service has been pretty effective in providing protection for our presidents. But nothing's foolproof. They just have to do a better job of staying alert and act as they did this time, providing the right security, eyes and ears open, and taking action immediately.
I just want to ask your opinion on a comment that was made by the Republican Florida Governor, Ron DeSantis, who said that people deserve the truth about how a would-be assassin was able to get so close to the former president at his Florida golf club. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think it's a fair statement. We have to, just like we had in Pennsylvania, we asked, how did the shooter get so close? In Pennsylvania, it was, inexcusable. Again, an open golf course, and I don't know this golf course particularly, not being a golfer anyway, but, it's an open, sprawling area. I don't know that they could have secured that perimeter really effectively to keep someone from getting in. So I think the answer would be just what we said, and that the Secret Service had to work effectively and efficiently within the protocol they have established for a candidate who's out there in the public playing golf. I think that would be the answer, but it's certainly a fair question.
And do you get the impression, talking to colleagues, past and present, that, the Secret Service, the FBI, is struggling, that the agencies are stretched very thinly and they simply don't have the resources, the manpower, or indeed the talent on the market to recruit enough of the right people?
Well, law enforcement in general in the United States, we know, is struggling from recruiting people, and that's more on the local police department. The FBI and the Secret Service have quite a reputation within the country and within the world And historically, I knew in the FBI, we never had trouble recruiting anybody. We'd have multiple applicants for every position. And though I'm out of it now, I would guess that remains the same. It's a highly sought after position in law enforcement and those looking for a law enforcement career. But having worked with the Secret Service on task forces, I know that protective details are very, very manpower intensive. It strains them to the max. But the issue is you have a field office that maybe has to do protective detail every now and then. Not every year is an election year, but even though our current president and other dignitaries travel. But the demand for the manpower kind of waxes and wanes depending on the situation in the Secret Service. So they would have to keep a very large contingent of agents in order to address all these possibilities. But again, I think in light of what's happening, they're going to revisit their protocols, and maybe they'll have to increase the number of agents they have for protective details.
As a former FBI special agent, I mean, I know hindsight is 2020, but is there anything that you think you would have done differently from what the people did on Sunday on that golf course?
From what we know, I can't imagine what they could have done differently. Again, people could say, as the governor asked, how did he get in? But I think we've answered that question. The detail was there in full force, that for protocol. They obviously were doing their job because they spotted this threat. So I can't see, just from the information we reported, what we could have done differently. But more information is going to come out, and maybe there was a lapse in security somewhere. Maybe the shooter entered somewhere that should have been secured. Again, without knowing the size of this golf course, but knowing how golf courses are, wide open area, not designed for protection. And I think it was not unrealistic that someone snuck in, but knowing that threat, the Secret Service worked with the appropriate protocol.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, the next few weeks before the presidential election, before people go to the polls, what needs to be done to make sure that nothing like this happens to either of the two candidates again?
Now, the only way to make sure nothing like this happens is to keep the candidates under lock and key in a room. And that's just not realistic. It is a presidential election. It's a very tight race, a contentious race. Both candidates are going to be out there pressing the flesh, meeting the public, having rallies. That can't be stopped, and nor should it be stopped. We just need to make sure that we have the adequate protection and the adequate manpower to make effective protection, and just hope the candidates follow appropriate protocol and try to keep themselves safe. But understand what they are. They're politicians out there trying to get elected, and they're going to do whatever they have to do, in terms of public appearances to make that happen.
Yeah, it wouldn't make a very interesting election if they all stayed at home, would it? Well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Former FBI Special Agent Michael Tabman, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews and debate. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
In a journey that is rich in its content and substantiated by its details, from primitive cave drawings to the engraving of letters on stones, it set out. Writing was invented, and the alphabet shortly followed. And is the case in all journeys. What is new is the title. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you, As you enter a meditative state, as you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. The first calligraphers excelled in their precision and artwork skills. They added diacritics, and with ink and tools they wrote it all out, and they decorated them with their motifs. These are the messages of light, passed on through the history of Arab manuscripts. When you are facing a manuscript, it is inevitable that time will simply fleet you as you enter a meditative state. As you wipe the dust off of it, the fragrance of history captivates you. You begin to visualize the very fingertips of those who created this fine craft that they excelled in. When you have the opportunity to handle a manuscript, you'll begin to wonder, how were these papers made? How were all these manuscripts written and duplicated? How did they last long enough to reach us in a state of fine quality, grace, and elegance? They bear the history of the Arabs, preserving their intellectual prowess in all the fields of knowledge. All of this confirms the importance of Arab manuscripts and reflects how skillful and capable ancient Arab manufacturing had become. The manuscript industry was based on four main pillars. The appearance and material the paper was made of was the first and most important pillar, especially paper that was made from papyrus plant, and parchment that was made from animal skin, and paper that was made of linen and hemp. The second of these pillars was the ink and midad that was used, and the various colors that were selected. The third pillar was the pen that was used, which included the associated tools and calligraphy methods that were used. Binding was the fourth and final pillar in the production of an Arab manuscript. Sources make varying claims regarding the kind of paper used in manufacturing manuscripts. It mostly depends on the raw material that the paper was made of. Besides parchment, papyrus was widespread, and it reigned supreme for an extended period of time until paper, or al-kaghid, was invented and was deemed a fierce competitor to them. It reached its zenith in the middle of the 5th century Hijri. It replaced papyrus, and the printing presses that began to use paper were more common and prevalent. The Arabs of the pre-Islamic era and Islam were familiar with papyrus, which was known as al-Qaratis. As an important material used for writing, it was even mentioned in their poetry. Tarafa bin al-Abd likened the face of his beloved to al-Qurtas from the Levant, as it is white and pure. Their cheek is similar to al-Qurtas from the Levant, and was encrypted like a Yemeni stone that had not been exposed. Papyrus constituted an important leap in the manuscript industry. It led to developments in the authorship and inscribing processes, and also helped spread information across vast distances because of the advantages this paper had. It was light, non-cumbersome to store and transport. The paper could even be transported through the folds of clothing. The papyrus plant would grow abundantly in the swamps of the river delta in ancient times. The ancient Egyptians benefited from it. and it resulted in the development of one of the most important industries, which are considered one of the greatest accomplishments that Egypt had offered human civilization, that being the paper-making industry. From this papyrus plant, paper is made. It is one of the most important agricultural crops that grew in the swamps of the Delta in Egypt. And there are various species of it present in Sudan till this very day. They served many purposes in ancient Egypt, which ranged from making boxes, baskets, and ropes, but its core value lies within its use in making paper. Egypt was considered a center for this important industry, and it began to export a large portion of what they produced to the countries of the ancient world. The papyrus plant is from the sedge family of plants that belongs to the cypress genus and the papyrus species. The word paper is derived from papyrus, and it is what we use in the English language. The length of the papyrus plant ranges from 7 to 10 feet, and it is made of a trisection stem. Its bark is thin and coarse, and a width of a single reed is about 1.5 inches. The reed has a core made of cellular tissue, which paper is made out of. The reed is split into two, and each half is sliced from the center of the stem. The pulp slices are then placed side by side on flat wooden surfaces. A second set of these slices are placed perpendicularly to the first layer, and they are stacked side by side. These slices are then soaked and are gently pressed with pieces of wood until they level out. They are then left to dry in the sun. The end result is a piece of paper ranging in its size from 20 to 30 centimeters in width and 30 to 40 centimeters in length. It is easy to make files of varying lengths out of papyrus. Separate papers are bound together, where they are polished and pasted again until we obtain a roll that can reach 15 meters in length. Only one side of the papyrus would be used for writing, and it would be the side that had fibers that were horizontal, so that the pen that was used would be able to write with little to no resistance. The papyrus roll is then cut up into equal pieces, which are then written on and stacked on top of each other. It is used in corresponding messages, pamphlets, and manuscripts. Everything that nature made available to mankind has been used to aid them. Here we have papyrus paper. Thousands of them are preserved in libraries around the world. The Phoenicians transferred them to people around the world. We have received many letters and instruments that were written and described on papyrus, including papyrus from Hierakonpolis Magna. This papyrus dates back to 22 Hijri. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo has the oldest manuscript that is written on papyrus. This manuscript dates back to 4,500 years ago. and it contains details about the work the builders of the pyramid of the pharaoh Khufu partook in. It was found by a team of French and Egyptian archaeologists in Wadi al-Jarf on the coast of the Red Sea. Unfortunately, only fragments of the early works of Arab manuscripts that were written on papyrus have made their way to us. Among them are Mawti'a Malik bin Anas, the Journal of Humam bin Munabbih, and the Journal of Abdullah bin al-Hayya. The most complete manuscript that has reached us that was written on papyrus is the book titled A Collection of Prophetic Hadiths by Abdullah bin Wahb, who passed away in the year 97 Hijri in the region of Idfu in Upper Egypt, and it is now preserved in the Egyptian National Library. The year 323 Hijri witnessed the last known use of papyrus for writing as of now, as that century would be the last to witness the manufacturing of papyrus paper. With these words, we toured around the world of ancient papers, and in our modern times, we witnessed its great legacy, and in the lives of the ancients, it was a point of skill and craftsmanship. Phenomenal human innovation was written down upon their papyri, which still shines on till this very day.